My 20-tab journey. An LSD trip report by Pepperoni Playboy 20. Posted to earwood.org June 20th, 2019. This happened about 8 months ago, and still shakes me to the core every time I think about it. Mostly about how grateful I am to have had such an experience, let alone mentally and physically survive it. Anyway, let's just start from the beginning. I was at a music festival at my local amphitheatre, and ended up buying really good doses for a cheap price outside in the parking lot from my friends, who were already inside. I didn't get any for myself, since I had tripped the day before and I prefer to space out my trips, but when I walked inside the venue, nothing could ever prepare me for what was about to happen. I met up with my friends in the pit, gave them the doses, and we were all grooving and moving as anyone would at a music festival, when I spotted my Lucy plug amongst a sea of people, and he spotted me. He started dancing his way over to me, and when he was close, he started dancing with me and told me to open my mouth. Now, I know what you're thinking. I really should have known why he asked me to open my mouth, but in that moment, with everyone sharing off such incredible energy with no time to think, for some reason I justified that he was going to give me some water, Lamau. I opened my mouth and closed my eyes, and tasted what felt like a goddamn sticky note on my tongue. Immediately, I knew what was up, and what was about to unfold. But then again, in that moment, I didn't think to try and spit it out, so I asked him how many he gave me. And he said, about 20 or so. You got it, brother. I did that for a reason. And he continued to dance like nothing had happened. I continued to dance as well, taking some of my friend's water to wash down the tabs, attempting to prepare for what only people should witness right before they die. Within 15 to 20 minutes, I had already felt it kicking in, and everything beyond that loses all meaning of time, logic, and really, any sense of the reality that I once knew. Immense energy surged through my body, as waves started to ripple in the atmosphere from the sounds that came from the stage and the crowd, and they began to take up my entire field of vision. It dumbfounded me in a way that, with time, I found I could no longer dance, and for a couple of minutes simply just stood in place, completely in tune with everything and nothing at the same time. As it got more and more intense, I had to sit down, and immediately, when I sat down, it all kicked in right there. I was completely and utterly gone from reality, and my own self as I once knew it. The minute I sat down, each thought that I ended up being completely immersed in each and every one of them, where they'd continue to grow and flourish and become their own parallel universes that I'd lived through until I died in that thought, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Whenever I died in those thoughts, I'd come back to my body and back to the amphitheatre, only to be blasted off again with barely any room to breathe into another thought and another universe. I don't know how long I was sitting down in the pit area, but it must have been long enough for other people to notice and take concern as to how tripped out I was. At some point, I thought I'd gotten back up and started dancing again. I started to hear people around me talk about, "Oh, hey, there's some dude in that chair over there. He's really fucked up. I reckon somebody should be looking after him." And I looked over and saw who they were talking about. Only to see myself. God, to see myself in that state was unreal. I literally was outside of my body, looking at my shaking, drenched body grip onto a seat for dear life while my mind continued to blast off at full speed. When I came to the realization that that sweaty, quivering body was my own, I managed to leave the pit, and at this point, experienced what I think was sensory overload, and I regained consciousness in a grass area outside the stage, surrounded by my friends. At this point, I was grasping at straws, trying to recollect where I was and who I was and what was happening. But all I felt was that I had done something terrible. Several thoughts began to flash throughout my mind. Did I kill someone? Am I dead? Does the FBI know where I am and what I'm doing? am I gonna go to jail? One thing that stuck out to me the most was how much I felt like a failure. I felt a necessity to try and be in control of my trip, not for myself, but for my friends, as some of them that were tripping for the first time. They kept trying to talk to me to see if there was someone they could call to get me out of there. But I kept saying that I was sorry, over and over and over again. I started to cry. If any of you have seen the movie Get Out, I felt like I was trapped in the sunken place, merely falling yet also floating, surrounded by a sea of black while I watched a small projection on a screen of what was going on around me. I couldn't talk clearly, I couldn't move. I just lay there in that field while I tried desperately to make sense of something, anything. Now, I'm a very experienced psychonaut, but nothing could have prepared me for that. Normally in times of distress on normal doses, I'm able to go with the flow and overcome it. But I couldn't this time. I kept trying so desperately to be in control, and the more I think about it now, I realise that's a crucial character flaw on my part. I felt I was obligated to be in control of the situation and look after my friends. But I couldn't. And most of all, I couldn't accept that I was anything but in control. And in the end, all I wanted was for someone to understand. Someone to try and reach out to me, to connect with me on the level that I was on. But none of my friends could. Until an unnamed stranger came up to me, moved my friends out of the way, grabbed my hand and said, "Bro, I've been there, you're gonna be okay." I looked at him with a shock of relief and screamed, "You know!" And then, I didn't feel so isolated. I felt cared for. I didn't feel alone. And then, and there, the stranger had me take a Xanax. And thank God he did, because everything actually mellowed down after that. I honestly don't know what would have happened if he hadn't done so. Anyway, long story short, my roommate picked me up and drove me back home to ride out the rest of the trip, which I ended up finishing with Fight Club and a well-deserved mango. Sometimes, even today, I feel like I've actually never left the amphitheatre. Like, the life I'm living now is merely one of the thoughts that progressed into its own universe, and I'm going to live this one out until I die, and I'll wake up back at the concert venue. It took me months to cope with depersonalization, flashbacks, and to learn how to act human again. But I managed, and I'm ultimately grateful for the experience. I only wish I could describe it better and in more detail. But having said that, I'm sure you guys know how difficult it is to detail the unknown, let alone the psychedelic experience as a whole.
The Great Architect of Life. A 5,600 microgram LSD experience, posted to shroomery.org. There is no way to tell my story without coming off utterly insane. However, I truly believe this experience was not only life-changing, that it has been a major awakening and change in my life and soul. I consider myself a shaman, an explorer of spiritual and physical realms. I've seen many things, however nothing will ever compare to this truly humbling and enlightening experience. It all started with LSD. Me and two friends had decided we would not only push ourselves to a higher consciousness, but test our mental and spiritual limits. One friend had similar goals in mind, as we were both very spiritual and experiment with LSD for spiritual purposes only. However, my other friend uses it strictly for recreational uses. Anyway, I planned to take 2 tabs of LSD every 20 minutes, which eventually culminated in 14 hits of LSD. This was for me. The others took 7, as I am much more experienced. Each dose had approximately 400 micrograms, which equals to about 4 hits per 1 tab. Overall, I consumed 5,600 micrograms of LSD. Everything was going smoothly at first. We simply enjoyed ourselves and just laughed and had a great time until the time that I planned to meditate, after making sure the others were safe. However, it all hit me unexpectedly. I was staring at my friend, which at this point, he turned into a midget and ran off. I was far gone, but doing well. When this happened, I burst out into laughter. I felt nothing but complete joy. After a good 2 minutes of laughing though, my laugh fell to tears. This point in time, I felt many things as I was curled up into a ball on the couch. In a matter of 1 second on Earth, and what would feel like hours in this realm, I assumed I belonged to this being I believed to be God. I was face to face with him, though he was a blinding, humbling light, weakening and bringing me feelings of utter joy, sadness, fear, and even a humbling bliss. I can hardly explain this feeling, other than that it was divine. I felt that I was in two places at once, in the presence of this God, and on Earth completely conscious of both of these worlds. In this, I was scolded by this being, for being so misled and blind. I remember the conversation I had with this being, and feeling that I was with him for hours, even though on Earth it happened in a split second. After being scolded, he revealed to me many truths and falsehoods that haunted me. I can never fully describe what I went through, other than that it was the most humbling experience I'd ever had. When this being explained everything, I began to see the architect of the spiritual and physical plane, and how this being had created everything. I remember walking through this spiritual grid with lines everywhere. It looked very similar to this. There were numbers and mathematics everywhere. It blew my mind. Everything just made so much sense. This is what I believed to be God's architect. It was all too organised and structured too perfectly to be fake. This was not in my head, it was real. In this moment, my friends were observing me, seeming very interested in everything. I tried so hard to describe everything to them, all while walking physically in this grid-like world. Suddenly, a being came into my presence. He was formed like a grid, similar to a 3D model in a video game before they placed the skin on the character. This man guided me using a conscious voice as we began to walk, and a world around me began to form around. What appeared to me was similar to a library, similar to this picture. Unfortunately, I can't actually get the picture, the link in the trip report doesn't work, so I'm just going to feature some images of the Akashic Records, which is what he's actually referring to. Basically, for those of you who aren't in the know, I'll just read the Wikipedia article. In the religion of Theosophy and the philosophical school called Anthroposophy, the Akashic Records are a compendium of all universal events, thoughts, words, emotions, and intent ever to have occurred in the past, present, or future, in terms of all entities and life forms, not just human. They are believed by Theosophists to be encoded in a non-physical plane of existence known as the mental plane. There are anecdotal accounts, but no scientific evidence for the existence of the Akashic Records. They've actually come up in a lot of trip reports that I've put in the past. I think there was one about Datura I did, where they actually encountered the Akashic Records, so go check that one out. It's actually really fascinating whether you believe in it or not. I just think it's really interesting. Upon seeing this, I knew exactly where I was. The Akashic Records. In this moment, an unlimited and overwhelming source of knowledge poured through my mind at such an unbearable rate. Suddenly, spiritual truths and earthly visions would run through my head at the speed of light. At this point I knew I was connected to an unlimited source of knowledge. On Earth, my friends were surrounded around me as I kept spinning in a circle as I'm walking through this library. I'd spit out countless amount of information that for some reason only made sense to my spiritual friend who had experienced this himself. At this point, I felt like I knew everything. Any question asked was answered, no matter how difficult. Even now, I can recall this knowledge very easily, as I feel I am now connected to this place by soul. I remember feeling countless emotions, as I would see the most horrifying visions of pain and suffering, as well as beauty. I saw all aspects of the earth, and grew spiritually more aware the longer I dwelled in this library. After a few minutes, everything grew more rapid and more intense. Everything was infinite and way too much for my human mind to handle. It began to hurt, and it became so overwhelming. I forced myself out as my tears and the feeling of so many emotions within a second. Again, 1 second on Earth was like hours there. I just cannot explain it. I remember trying to describe so much, but there are no words to describe such divine knowledge. I remember seeing this vast knowledge and only being revealed such a small percentage that it blew me through many different dimensions simultaneously, witnessing countless beings and worlds, all who were as conscious of me as I was of them. In this moment, I felt this feeling of becoming one with everything, and realised that everything is one. All lives, beings, even a simple little rock. We are one. I cannot describe this. At this point, my mind was worn and blown away. I needed a break. I needed to fathom everything because it was all too much to handle. I know some people who have experienced a very similar thing to what I have, which ensures my faith that this was all 100% real and divine. Now, weeks later, I am a changed man. I see the world with more sympathetic eyes, with a much deeper connection to everything. I now hold a connection with this being, and he guides me. I do not share all this for bragging rights. That is not my reason. I share this because I feel that I've been given a privilege of viewing this amazing experience, and I want the world to know that your spirit is more real than you can ever imagine. That there is many gods, but there is one above all. I'm also hoping that I just might find someone who can relate to all this. I'm sorry that I cannot be more vivid, but remember, I have only shared with you a small portion and described everything the best I possibly can. Please, if anyone else can relate, please share.
An 800 microgram LSD trip, sent in by a subscriber. I'm not an experienced psychedelic user by far. The first trip I had was on 600 micrograms of LSD the summer of last year at a party. Needless to say, it ended up bad, but I learnt a lot from it. I'd kept asking to see my girlfriend because I felt like she was the only one who could soothe me, the only one I really knew who I could trust. I also learnt to respect substances in general. I'd been building myself up to this experience for quite a bit. Ever since then, I've tried to only do psychedelics when I'm with my girlfriend. I've done shrooms here and there, and I've gotten over the taste, but LSD will always be my favourite. This is mainly because my last trip on shrooms was on 4 grams, and I felt a wave of evil enter my body. It was scary. So for this trip, I have to set the scene a bit. A couple days before April 1st, I had tripped on acid. It wasn't too fun because I was by myself. I was off 200 micrograms. On the night of April 1st, my girlfriend wanted to trip acid with me, and it had been a week for her, so according to the calculator I use, her recommended dose was 400 micrograms. My recommended dose was 600 micrograms, but I took 800 just to be safe. An hour passes by. Neither one of us is feeling anything whatsoever. I decided to smoke weed because I knew it would intensify the effects. I never thought it would have intensified it to this degree. At first, I had to lay down and pretend like I was sleeping. I knew something was up, and I was about to feel the full 800 micrograms that I took. As I closed my eyes, I could see the bedroom through this tunnel-like lens, something I swore I had seen in a dream before. As it was kicking in for me, it started to kick in for her as well. My mind is kinda hazy about all the events that occurred, so it may be out of order. But the first thing that I can remember is that we started talking to each other telepathically. I would look at her and think, I love this woman so much. And she would respond out loud with, I love you so much more. Eventually, after messing around with telepathy, we lay down and stared at the ceiling, and just sorted through different emotions. I chose to be angry, and we both became angry. But it wouldn't last for long, as a rush of joy would fill me, and all of a sudden, she felt that same happiness as well. Emotions came and went, in what I would describe as waves. I would feel sadness from one side of my brain until it reached hers, and that would become what we felt for about a minute before it was on to the next. At some point, I had started zoning out. I would fight back to make sure nothing insane would happen, but each time I zoned out, I would stay longer.
Eventually, I decided to let go to see where it would take me. Vibrant colours would fill the room. I would faintly see machine elves. I didn't see them vividly, but it was enough to make out what I was seeing. I'd started to feel like a machine elf myself. I'd realised how they play a part in keeping reality contained. They carry us from one moment to the next. If you see a picture, every line you see was another one of my senses. Everything I saw, like the walls for instance, that was me. Every breath me and my girlfriend took was me. Everything I felt through touch was me. Even the faintest smells were myself. I was connected to the reality that I was experiencing through this lifetime, totally. I started looking at my girlfriend's face, and she was shifting through different people, young and old. I saw my mum and grandma at one point. She said something to me and I had a flashback through my cousin's eyes. I know for a fact that he's done acid. Whatever she said to me, someone had said to him at some point. Can't remember exactly what it was though. When the flashback was over, I looked at my girlfriend, whose face was combined with many, many others. When I'd thought of a person, she became them. I tested it out with my mum and, just as I thought, she was her. That's when I realised she had the same soul as my mum. When I first took LSD, I looked at my mum and almost started crying, saying, "You were my girlfriend this whole time." Now that may seem a bit weird, but it's the fact that they share the same soul. After this, I started to get scared. I told her, "Keep shifting through realities." She replied with, "And you will do so for eternity." Hearing that, despite not fully knowing what she meant, managed to calm me down. She then turned into a muscle, and this eye opened on her forehead and it started projecting what me and her would describe as creation. Excuse the vulgarity here, but she had gotten into the mood really badly. I won't go into detail, but I will just say that we felt connected in an unimaginable way. I was in control of my energy and everything I did. I knew what spots to hit, and I could feel her because I was her. I knew everything that needed to be done. Once she had finished, she asked me, "Wait a second, how much did you take?" That's when I had flashbacks of previous lives. She had been the officer who arrested me while asking me, "How much did you take?" She'd been next to me on my deathbed crying, "How much did you take?" She'd been my one friend who had been amazed, asking me, "How much did you take?" Told her 800 and she was kind of pissed upon hearing this, but I assured her it was fine because of how well I handled myself compared to my first trip. I ate some chips afterwards and every atom within every chip was something I could feel. They were all different realities. We were trying to put on Time by Pink Floyd to vibe out for the rest of the trip. Though, got stuck in the same thought loop where we'd forget what we were doing, turn off the TV, only to be bored by the silence and then turn it back on. Broke the loop and it finally started to wear off. After going through this experience, I am trying DMT next. A 2000 microgram LSD trip report, posted to the Psychonauts subreddit by IceDog 3 years ago. The time has come. I've been saving 10 200 microgram tabs just for today. I tested the tabs with an Ehrlich Regent and Hoffman Regent test. They were 100% good to go, and so was I. I placed the 10 tabs on my tongue. They were tabs with smiley faces on them. They were very thin compared to past tabs I've had, but the test came back positive, so I thought nothing of it. They were very large, so it was hard to fit all 10 on my tongue, but after I did, I snapped a pic on my phone and went downstairs to sit on my couch. I turn on Family Guy and go on my phone while I wait for it to kick in. A total of 10 minutes pass, and shit is already swirling. I look at my TV and it starts warping in and out. I sit back and enjoy the visuals. About 30 minutes pass of me just sitting on my couch.
I go up to my room to lay in my bed as the body high was getting very intense. I lay on my bed and stare at the floor. The floor slowly begins to get covered in psychedelic symbols and patterns until my floor was no longer visible beneath them. I stare into the pattern on my floor and watch as it extends infinitely into nothingness, endlessly. 30 more minutes or so pass, and I want to get out of my bed to get water, but I'm afraid if I step on my floor I will fall through it into another dimension for all of eternity and never come back. My phone lights up, and I can barely make out that my friend is calling me. I pick up and we chat, and I start giggling uncontrollably. I'm not struggling to verbalise words at this point, and I explain to him that I can't step on my floor because I fall through it. He convinces me that I'll be fine, and tells me to jump with both feet onto the floor. I do so, and to my surprise, I'm on solid ground. I'm actually not falling. I start giggling in relief. I lay on my floor and talk to my friend for a while until I get back on my bed and lay and listen to my friend. He adds another person to the call, and they're at a party. There's too much going on in the call at this point, and I'm afraid my brain will shit itself if I keep listening. I leave the call, and my friend calls me separately. We talk for a little until I can't anymore. The body load is becoming too much, and everything is getting very intense, so I hang up. I stumble to my bathroom, which is right across from my room, and I get over to the toilet and attempt to throw up, but I can't. The nausea is very intense, but I can't vomit, so I get back in my bed. I lay down and decide to turn on music. I lay listening to it, and the euphoria begins to become outrageously intense. A wave of it rushes over me. It feels like a million orgasms. I look at my pants, and I see that I've fucking jizzed myself. I go and take a short shower to clean up. Felt like an eternity. I get back to my room and it's 8:15. I start wondering how that happened to me. What caused me to jizz my pants? And then I wondered who me was. What did me just do? I can't remember. Who is I? What's even happening? My head falls to my pillow and I pass out. There's an orb of light. There's peace and tranquility. Time stops. In fact, time does not exist at all. It's irrelevant. It's an eternity. Something comes and says something. A divine being of some sort. There is nothing actually there, but its presence is noted. It guides the orb of light to a web of thought and memories. Something's memories. Memories of sadness, despair, and locked thoughts. Tragedies locked far away so that they did not have to be remembered. Memories that the memorizer denies. But why are these memories being viewed? What do they mean? The orb then flies away, and so does the divine presence. But if those had left, then what is stuck here observing these memories? There's nothing actually here to view them, and yet they are still being viewed by something. All of the memories, bad and good, flash before the observer. The observer wonders what is being shown. It decides to accept these memories as its own. It takes them and makes them part of what allows it to observe. The memories stop. There is light, and I awake. I look at my hand. What is this? Where am I? I look to the right and stare at an object. An oval that reads 11:22. I stare at it, trying to figure out what it means. What is this object trying to tell me? What message is it trying to get across to me? Then all of a sudden, the oval changes to 11:23. I can't understand why it would change. This must mean something. Why am I seeing this? What am I here to learn? Obviously, the answer must be around here somewhere. Wherever here is. I decide to forget about the oval to my right. It must not mean anything. I see a black object in my hand. I observe the object and find pushables on the side of it. Upon pushing one, a light flashes from it. There is an image and it reads 11:23. I look at the oval, which reads the same. As I stare at the oval, I see the glowing screen change. It now reads 11:24. I look back at the oval, and it reads the same as well. They must be connected. But why are they both displaying this? What could it mean? I stare and watch for what seems like forever, watching them count up. I feel I understand what the objects are showing me. They are counting up to something, but to what? The oval changes to 11:29 next, and I know what will happen. There will be an 11, 2, and blank, and then a random symbol after that. But, to my dismay, that isn't what happens. Instead, the oval changes to 11:30. I cannot comprehend this. I just spent my entire existence trying to figure out how this object works, and I was wrong. I had seen the 3 symbol before, though why has it appeared again? I look up and try to figure out what's happening. I decide this object means nothing, and it's just meant to mess with me, so I give up. I crawl out of this thing I'm lying in, and head towards a part of the wall that seems to be of a different material than the rest of the walls. A rectangle with a gold circle halfway down it. I head towards it and examine the gold circle. I remember seeing this in a past existence, perhaps. I grab it. It turns. The rectangle opens as I turn the gold knob and my heart drops. There is more than just this room. Across from me is another one of the rectangles, but this one is already open. I head towards it. In this room, I find an interesting item hanging on the wall. A reflection of sorts. A portal to a world just like the one I'm in. I stare into it and see a being looking at me. Or is that me looking at me? Nah, how could that be? Its body was covered with colourful swirls and psychedelic patterns. I notice writing on my arm and it reads LSD 2000 micrograms. My mind flashes. My memories start roaring back to me as I stare at myself in the mirror and begin piecing my identity back together. My life didn't start when I awoke on my bed next to that clock. I had a whole life before that, and I'm still experiencing that life. After being in my bathroom for an eternity, I finally figured out who I am. What makes me me. What me is. I feel one with all that is around me, and I can understand every object as if it has a consciousness and feelings. Each psychedelic swirl I can relate to and understand. I go back to my room and read the clock. It's 12:47. 6 hours and 47 minutes since I dropped, and I'm still tripping sack. The rest of the trip was very interpersonal and wasn't as mind-blowing as this part, so I won't write about it as this is already super long. I didn't stop tripping until 12 o'clock today, where I started to write this report. This much LSD was insane, and I cannot recommend anyone to ever do this much, but I also can't recommend against it entirely. It was insane, and I'm happy I did it, but I will never do this much again.
A 1000 UG trip. What could possibly go wrong? An LSD trip report from trippingly.net. The come up. My friends had varying experience of LSD. One friend, who will be called John, had tripped a total of 7 or so times. Another, Dave, a single time, actually 2 days before this trip. And the other, Kelly, was dropping for the first time for her birthday. The day seemed all too perfect for anything to mess up, despite the fact that during this time in my life, I had a myriad of personal issues and insecurities that could lead to bad experiences. I'm starting to get slightly uneasy even thinking about the experience I'm about to describe. Around 3:30 PM, my friend Kelly picked me up from my house. Dave was also in the car. We drove to another friend's house where my personal stash of acid was sitting in the freezer. The LSD was then dropped onto sugar cubes. Our plan was to drive to yet another friend's house and enjoy the ride in a safe setting. I walked into his house and saw a couple of my friends there. We briefly conversed and smoked a bowl of top quality CBD-rich sativa marijuana, an antipsychotic chemical that is in marijuana that reduces anxiety. We did this for a few minutes as a way to ease me into the trip. I pulled a whopping 7 sugar cubes out of the freezer and shoved them in my mouth, then licked a bunch of sugar crumbles off the foil which came from the edges of the 15 sugar cubes I had in my stash. This was a total of around 1,000 micrograms. My friends were a bit shocked I was willing to go that far, but they already were aware of my tendency to consume large quantities of psychedelics. I talked with them for another 10 minutes or so, and then I went back to the car. On my way to the car, I noticed I was starting to feel increasingly disoriented. It wasn't that euphoric, confusing sort of disorientation. It was more of a, I'm losing my fucking mind sort of thing. I felt slightly anxious, but I assumed the negative feelings would pass as soon as the acid took full effect. A couple minutes after I got in the car, Dave ate 2 sugar cubes and Kelly ate 1. The experience was about to get very, very ugly. To give you guys a little perspective on the unfathomable effects of 1,000 microgram doses, here is a quote from the Nobel Prize winning chemist Kary Mullis, who ingested 1,000 micrograms for his first dose. When you take 1,000 micrograms of LSD, you don't know you've taken anything. It just feels like that's the way it is. You might suddenly find yourself sitting on a building in Egypt 3,000 years ago, watching boats on the Nile. Yes, it is that crazy. 10 minutes into the car ride and 20 minutes after eating the sugar cubes, I was rapidly losing all touch with reality. I started wondering what was going on around me and why I was feeling so uncomfortable. I started telling my friends I was really scared, and the intense anxiety was gripping every single fibre of my body. I thought I was going to die, and that this trip was going to last until the end of eternity. By the minute, I was starting to panic more and more. This was only the beginning of an unimaginable nightmare that would show me the dark side of LSD and completely change my opinion about the drug in general. 25 minutes after taking the sugar cubes, we arrived at JAC's house. By that time I was stumbling all over the place and I was already having severe visual distortion. All movements were followed by strobing trails composed of detailed patterns, kaleidoscopes and rainbows. These visuals that I would have usually considered beautiful were now viewed as a reminder that I was in the middle of a trip that I so desperately wanted to end. When I got inside his house, I saw a few more of my friends sitting on the couch. My body temperature had elevated to the point I thought I was burning alive. I was completely out of my body and almost felt like I was on a high dose of ketamine. I felt embarrassed because I obviously looked like I couldn't handle my shit. Maybe this was just an extreme amplification of my general self-esteem issues. The faces were assuming demonic forms. I fled to JAC's room. I was already starting to experience ego loss, and I was going in and out of consciousness. This is the point where I lost track of time, so there is no point of trying to estimate anything. JAC followed me to his room and did his best to comfort me and talk me out of my bad trip. It was a completely ineffective attempt. A couple minutes later I started crying hysterically. Everything was getting darker. I fell into the most depressive state of my life, combined with the most acute sense of panic I've ever experienced. The floor was covered in spiralling kaleidoscopes that were rapidly shifting colours. I heard thousands of voices call me names like pussy and bitch. The room reeked of sewage and feces. This was the most negative emotion a human being could ever fathom. I so desperately wanted to stop the trip, but was immobilised and unable to move. I realised that the voices were all of the people I resented in my life the most. Cartoon blood was all over the ceiling and the walls. My vision seemed to stretch off into infinity. I was hallucinating so much I couldn't even believe it. I could see many different events of my life playing out as if it was a waking reality. Try and imagine being inside of a Saw movie firsthand, but 1,000 times more horrifying and traumatic. There was a moment in which my mind would shoot out my body 2 feet in front of me and then return back into it, and this looped over and over again for what felt like forever, at an impossible speed. Time was non-existent, and a second felt like forever. Not hours, not days, but an infinite amount of time. I kept hearing this bizarre futuristic noise that sounded like a computer glitching. The whole room was flashing as if something was flicking the on switch for a lamp up and down repeatedly. My jaw was rapidly vibrating like I'd taken 300 milligrams of MDMA. I always get major jaw clenching from acid. I had full-blown synesthesia as well. Everything was one. Everything was infinitely interconnected. I would look at the walls and become the walls. I would look at the floor and then become the floor as well, looking back at my body in a dissociative fashion. I was unable to differentiate any part of the outside world from my own physical body. The concept of I was now a mere construct of my mind, and I was nothing more than a complex bundle of atoms and molecules. Somehow, just a little while after this part of the trip, I regained some degree of consciousness. I stumbled to his backyard, where a group of 8 or so people were sitting, and I was watching the sky and everything in my external environment turning black and red. I could barely see anything. My vision was almost completely shot. I forget that I even had a body at this point, and I had absolutely no control over my muscular movements. I was in this survival mode where my mind was on autopilot, and had no idea that I was on drugs. I lost balance and fell backwards onto the ground. I continued to see more incredible vortexes of matrix-style numbers and letters spurt out from every direction. During my friends' attempts to help restore me to sanity, they asked if I knew what time it was. I responded with 8 AM, when it was actually late in the afternoon. That was quite enough of a response to prove I was completely and utterly going nuts, and there was no real way to help me. Once night fell, I was full on peaking in JAC's room. I began to literally have no idea who I was, where I was, or what drug I was even on, or what drugs even were in the first place. I knew that I was going to die, and there was nothing that could be done to stop it. At some point at the beginning of the peak, I realised that I could not recognise the room I was in. Suddenly I started seeing several cop cars pull into the room and put the sirens on. Yellow caution tape magically appeared around them as well. This was one of my worst nightmares coming to life before my very eyes. There was a line of already arrested criminals in handcuffs next to the cop cars, and they were all complaining that I had snitched on them for some unspecified reason. I knew I was in for absolute hell. Before I could see what was going to happen next, everything started fading to white. I could see nothing but burning white light, like I was looking directly at the sun from 100 feet away. What I saw was the ultimate truth, the answer to every question, the reason reality is the way it is. I existed within the past, present and future simultaneously. I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. I dissolved into infinity. I was existing in an infinite number of dimensions, living an infinite number of lives simultaneously for an infinite amount of time. Though my memory of this is hazy, I believe I relived every event of my entire life during the peak. I could fit our entire universe into a period at the end of a sentence. Time was a point of nothingness. I was everything, yet I was nothing. I was in pure ecstasy. I felt the unconditional love of the universe penetrating every pore of my body. If only this could have lasted forever. I suppose this was a taste of the beautiful part of ego death, but my stay in this ineffable place was cut short when I was suddenly catapulted into hyperspace, where I experienced every ounce of pain any human being could ever possibly experience at one time. The love had rapidly shifted to evil in its purest definition. I saw many miserable people I had seen throughout my life, including the homeless and starving. My brain's sensory filter was gone. Every last bit of information that could physically be processed at once was flowing through my head at light speed. I was dropped out of hyperspace directly into a hallucinatory prison facility. I saw hundreds of pit bulls, white supremacists, and naked black men running around. It was a state of sheer pandemonium. I've never been so unbelievably horrified in my entire life. I was now sure that this is where I would die. I was taken to the showers where I was bitten repeatedly by pit bulls and raped by the white supremacists and black men simultaneously. I was sobbing hysterically, screaming for it to stop. It was physical and emotional torture beyond your wildest dreams. I felt every single sensation, including their penises in my anus and the razor-sharp teeth of the vicious dogs. Who knows how long this actually went on for, but eventually this torture ended and I was back in JC's room. I saw all of my friends' faces covered in knife wounds and deep bleeding cuts. Puddles of blood were all over the room. My joints were still in severe pain from the physical torture I had just experienced. I looked at the clock and it read 9 PM, or something along those lines. Minutes after I came back to Earth, I realised that the purpose for human existence was to love. Love is our higher purpose. I now understood that the ego I had developed my entire life was an illusion all along. Our egos push us away from our ability to feel compassion towards others. As your ego fades away, you slowly dissolve into pure, unadulterated love. The illusion of separation created by our egos has been the root cause of suffering all across our planet, and sadly this is the reason the majority of the world kills each other for absurd purposes like religion and resources. Religions like Christianity hide behind the idea that there is an afterlife because they are afraid of death. There is nothing to fear, because when you die there is no you to fear anything. The only thing that separates us from other forms of life is our ability to think. Our ego is composed of our thoughts. When we stop relying on our ego, we cannot experience negative emotions. When we stop thinking, our ego ceases to exist, and then we can live a life of pure love, peace, and prosperity. The more we rely on our ego, the more we push ourselves away from the moment, which is all. Nothing outside the moment we are in right now will ever exist. Yesterday never is, and tomorrow will never be. Time is infinite. The past, present, and future are all occurring simultaneously. We are merely observers. Free will is an illusion. This was by far the most profound experience of my entire life. I quickly forgot all of those things within 15 minutes of the peak ending. I didn't fully understand the lessons I learned for until months had passed after the trip. The next day was easily the worst day of my life, excluding the trip. I felt so self-conscious about myself that suicide was all I could think about. I was thoroughly convinced that I had ruined my life permanently. During ego death, I became aware of the severity of my many mental disorders. I realised that throughout my entire life, I had been looked down upon as the special kid. I had not been aware of this until that moment. I felt like the most inferior form of life on the face of the earth. After I got home, I burst into tears. I even thought my family felt sorry for me and had pitied me my whole life because they thought I was a moron. I had a psychotic break for weeks afterwards. This was easily the most traumatic thing I have ever gone through in my life, and has left a lasting mark on me that I carry to this day. It's been over 6 months now and I think about this trip every day. It's nothing any human being ever deserves to go through, and I would never wish it on my worst enemy. Over time, this trip has had a profound impact on all areas of my life, in both positive and negative ways. Positives. I have very close friends now, and rather than the special kid, many people now view me as a very insightful and intelligent person. Before this experience, I had very few friends. I wasn't close friends with the ones mentioned in this report, but we did chill every once in a while. I now know what true friendship really is. I meet new people all the time. I suspect I used to have a mild form of autism, and this trip literally eradicated it. My entire family has mentioned multiple times that I'm a transformed person. I have fully developed social skills. I truly believe LSD is able to cure mental disorders, and the scientific community needs to conduct research on this. I act normally now. I view everyone I meet as a part of my own consciousness, which lets me act much more empathetically. I've earned excellent grades at my community college and have grown tremendously. Multiple people have commented that I'm an entirely different person. I've taken up Buddhism and adopted a very spiritual lifestyle. In terms of negative impact, several months ago I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I suspect I was already predisposed to this condition and the trip brought it out. I still have mental flashbacks nearly every day and have been scarred by this experience. I frequently have nightmares about this trip. My thoughts can be very scattered and clouded at times. My thinking is very impaired on some days, but it's very sporadic. I've learned how fucked up our world is, and sometimes I feel that ignorance is bliss. Our society disgusts me. I think that the human race is a joke. I'm going to say one thing. Do not take a high dose of acid unless you have a proper set and setting, or it can turn into the worst nightmare of your life. 300 micrograms is more than enough to have a spiritual experience. 1000 plus micrograms does not provide a near-death experience, it provides a beyond-death experience. Heed my warning. Don't make the mistakes I did. You are not invincible. LSD is a seriously powerful drug, and it has the ability to fuck you like nothing you could ever conceive of. In fact, after this experience I firmly believe it is the most powerful drug known to the human race. I smoked 150 milligrams approximately of DMT at once, 7 consecutive enormous hits, and the intensity could not come close to what I described in this report.
So this is what death looks like. An LSD trip report by White Light, posted at earwid.org, October 9th, 2010. When it comes to drugs, I can say in all honesty that I'm a very experienced user, despite my young age. I'm now 19 years old. I've had lots of experiences with stimulants, some with depressants, and countless trips in the world of hallucinogenics. I've been introduced to the world of drugs through salvia about 3 years ago. LSD and psilocybin mushrooms have been an important part of my life for about 2 years. The infamous dissociative known as ketamine has been an interesting tool to me, and much more than anything else, I acknowledge the infinite power of DMT about 20 times since I began my experimentations. When this event took place, I was just coming back from a rave party in the city. I was coming down off both MDMA and ketamine. I eventually thought that dropping some LSD could be a good idea. Who the hell would do that just after having drained his serotonin with too much MDMA? I don't know. But anyway, I took the vial from my desk, dropped 2 drops on my hand, and licked it. To be honest, I first thought that 2 doses of good LSD would satisfy me. I'd be able to draw or paint some crazy things while having some nice visuals. But then I thought, is it really worth it to just drop acid to have some cute little visuals? Or should I go for something more interesting? The highest amount I'd ever taken was a dose of about 550 to 700 micrograms. Since there was 5 other drops in the dropper, I decided to take them. I then proceeded to do what everybody who knows a bit about liquid LSD knows you should never do. I replenished the dropper with water and drank it as if it was a shooter. Twice, just to make sure not to waste anything. One shooter of a vial gave a trip of about 1,000 micrograms to a friend of mine, and it was the second time that this vial was being washed. It should be important to note that my vial was twice as big as his, and so has more surface in contact with the LSD, and that there was probably a couple more doses in my vial than in his. It could be considered a mistake to wash the vial as I did, but it was on purpose. I didn't really think about it. I just felt like it had to be done. I cleaned my room very fast because I know being on acid in my room, if it's messy, is only going to make me frustrated. I then went for a cigarette in the backyard and sit for a minute. Everything was heavily distorted, but I could still handle it. I thought about all the LSD I dropped, and realised that I had probably around 2,000 micrograms in my body. Era would note, claims of measured microgram dosages for LSD are usually unsupported. Quantitative measurements for LSD are very difficult to do and cannot be done casually. Without further detailed information about how the measurements were derived, it is reasonable to assume that most statements of microgram dosages of LSD on blotter or in microdots are either misinformed or overstated. Blank. I open my eyes and notice I'm back in my room without even remembering going back inside my apartment. I'm lying on my bed, eyes wide open. Nothing is left static. There are some waves of glowing blue light going across the room. Everything looks fluid. I start hearing some kind of chants and melodies alongside that electronic-like drone sound that I'm used to hearing while tripping on DMT. The visuals then stop waving and take a beautiful crystalline form. The world seems to be made of colourful geometric patterns. It really felt like a pre-breakthrough DMT experience, to be honest. This lasts for about 30 minutes. I then close my eyes, and I'm totally blinded by what many people call the white light. It's beautiful, but so intense. I'm not sure anymore I will be able to handle this experience. And this is where it starts to get bad. When I open my eyes, my room has stopped distorting and the colours are gone. The room is not back to normal. Worse, it looks like everything is grey and sad. There is a distinct substancelessness to everything. The whole world looks like it just died, as if the energy present in everything had just gone. I try to get up out of my bed and go somewhere happier, but I sit up on my bed and feel myself falling into an infinite void only to find myself lying again. Images are duplicating, repeating themselves, without meaning. I put my hands on my chest and try to relax, but it feels like my hands simply go through me as if I was non-existent, empty of any matter. My heart was beating at an incredibly fast rate. I started thinking that I had found two absolute laws of the universe that were totally contradictory, acting as a proof that reality was a lie, an illusion created out of my own consciousness. In fact, there was nothing at all. Nothing but solitude in my own consciousness and lies. My brain, being now aware that everything was fake, made everything look fake, dead, and empty. Was that death? I wish death was more like a lack of consciousness, a complete calm darkness. But this death was much more like a purgatory, grey and rotten. My roommate came into my room and asked me if I was okay. He wasn't aware I was on acid. In my head though, it looked more like he was shouting at me. Being the consciousness from which reality emerged from, I had destroyed every human being in my world by destroying the illusion. This is why he was kind of frustrated. He went out of the apartment laughing. I felt bad, for I'd messed up big time, and now I know that I had killed everything I knew. All I had left was my room, which I wanted to go away from with all my heart. While still lying on my bed, I started losing every feeling of my body. It felt like I was losing contact only to be lost in this room as a dead spirit. Every hope left me. Some weird experimental drum and bass started playing in another room. Complete, clear, precise audio hallucination. It sounded like my consciousness was glitching out, lagging. But then suddenly it stopped. Everything came back to life all at once. I got an awareness of my body again. The colours and the visual hallucinations came back. Everything was moving again, alive. All these sensations coming back at the same time made me think I was genuinely going to explode. But I felt warm again. My other roommate eventually came to see me, and when I told him how my trip went, he got me an antidepressant, some kind of dopamine stabilizer or something like this. It just did it to make sure I had no other problem, even though the trip was pretty much finished. Everything after this was kinda quiet. Well, this was obviously the most intense LSD experience I ever had, and maybe that I will ever have. Sure, I will drop LSD again, but maybe not that much at the same time. But you never know. I've seen what I needed to see, and even if it wasn't very pleasant, I believe it is those kind of experiences that teach you the most. I've been gifted with the amazing phenomenon that is called life. For some time, it felt like it had been taken away from me. Now that I have it back, I know that I have the power to make anything I want out of it.
A 1500 microgram LSD trip report, submitted by Jude. I was 17 at the time, smoked cannabis regularly, and did mushrooms around 20 times. I was fairly comfortable with tripping, and was going to do LSD for the 4th time. I bought some gel tabs, and they were around 300 micrograms each. I buy from this guy who I've known for a very long time, very trusted. My plan was to buy 5 and then have them for a while, so I went and bought them from him around noon that day. I was planning on taking 3/4 of a tab that night, around 150 to 250 micrograms. This would have been my usual dose to have an insightful, powerful trip. At around 10 PM, I take the tab. Not even 30 seconds later, almost as if it was meant to happen, my plug texts me and says not to take the tabs. He gave me the wrong pack. Instead of 5, he gave me 20. So instead of 150 to 250 micrograms, I was taking upwards of 1500. Now at the time, the largest dose I've taken was 5 grams of shrooms. So I was freaking out a bit, thinking I was going to overdose and lose my sanity. So what I tried to do was to get into bed and fall asleep before I started tripping. Now if you've had psychedelics before, you know sleeping really isn't an option. All of a sudden, as I'm laying with my eyes closed, I started to hear a rumble, as if I was hearing a train track in my ear. This progressively was getting louder and louder. I also felt as if the atoms in my body were all vibrating aggressively. This got more intense as the rumble got louder. I remember feeling as if I was being pulled out of my skin. I tried everything in me to hold on to my life. But as I remember a friend telling me, you have to let go. The more you fight it, the worse it gets. Just as I start to let go, I am shot into nothingness. It wasn't like the black we see as humans. It was just nothing. I wasn't in my body at this point. I lost every trace of who I was as a human. I wasn't even in this reality anymore. But I had my memories, and I still had a part of my human experience in me. There was just this complete silence all around me. I couldn't speak in English, but I could experience and feel. I could understand myself better than I ever was able to before. I remember feeling so much resentment, and I was angry with myself because I thought I'd ruined my life. I thought I would never see family, friends, dogs, trees, or stars ever again. I was stuck like this for eternity. It is very hard to put into time, because there was none. It just felt infinite. So over what felt like a very long time, I was able to start to come to peace with my death, come to terms with the mistakes I made and realise it was okay. Not only overdosing on LSD, but also various things I seriously regretted in my life. Now for this next part, I will do my best to explain, but it is very difficult, as it was not comparable to this world. A line shot by me on my left. I remember being so excited because I've been in nothingness for what felt like eternity. I ended up being carried along this line towards something. At a certain point, the line shot ahead of me and created 3 visions. The first vision was that of my brother, alone at a trailer we used to hike at with his dog. My ego was not there. It was almost as if I was floating above him on a random day. The second vision was my sister, in an apartment room I've never seen before. She was sitting alone, watching TV on a red couch. The third vision was an empty white room with a person. There was very little about them that represented a person, but they were glowing. I felt we were looking at each other and I felt this overwhelming sense of connectedness, almost as if we've known each other several lifetimes. After this, I was still being dragged along the line. There was a golden light that suddenly appeared. I felt like I had closure, seeing my brother and sister one last time. I was at peace, truly at peace. When I was carried towards this golden light, it got bigger and bigger and engulfed the nothingness. When it was finally all around me, I felt like I was being hugged by all of the gods. The most warming, loving feeling I've ever felt. It absolutely was unspeakable. Then at this point, I was shot into my body again, anywhere between 3 and 5 AM. I was still tripping very hard, but also was just so confused and scared. It took me a good month to grasp this world again, but I really felt as if I was reborn. I was a new person after that day, and my world has been utterly amazing. It was the best thing that has ever happened to me. If I could spread one overall theme that this taught me, was that life is precious. Everything we experience in this short mortal lifetime is so unbelievably beautiful if we take a step back. So I ask all of you, whatever is happening in your life, to take a step back and love. Now, I practice spirituality daily, and have learnt countless things from not only this experience, but all of my trips combined. I love you all so much. We are all one.
Just cured my depression and met a moth entity on 3,000 micrograms. An LSD trip report posted to the LSD subreddit by the user Underwater Archer 3 years ago. Dose: 15 200 microgram tabs. It is important to note here that I did 5 200 microgram tabs 6 days ago, so I did have a bit of a tolerance, and I am sorry for abusing it like this. I promise I'm not normally like this at all. The peak lasted about 6 hours, and I still feel it as I'm writing this. Feels like probably a 400 microgram trip right now, and it's been about 16 hours. Writing this is very hard, but I wanted to do it while it was fresh in my mind, so I apologise if some of it is nonsense. Backstory. The past 6 or so years of my life have been a constant battle with depression. I've had multiple suicide attempts since high school. I've been doing psychedelics for about 1.5 years trying to gain control of my own mind, with small victories here and there, but never anything definite. I had a really shitty day, and was pissed that I've tried so hard and for so long to be happy, but without it ever happening. Today was my breaking point, and I was determined to get back control of my mind. I just said fuck it, and popped 15 tabs, and forced myself to be happy again. So, here's what happened. The come up was relatively quick, with effects starting to hit around 25 minutes after ingestion. Once I started noticing these effects, I went to my room, shut out all the lights possible, covered my eyes, and put on my trip playlist. I just kept repeating in my head that I wanted to be happy. I was going down geometric neon tunnels that kept getting more complex as time went by. These labyrinths would fractal apart, and each time, it felt like I was more alone. Similar, but not as intense as the line from my last big trip, which I have a report about on my profile. Eventually, it became a cave, with no colour and no sound. Then, I felt completely alone, and wondered is this what death is actually like? I kept thinking about the idea of death for what felt like an eternity, until the idea of death had a positive feeling towards it. I came to peace with the fact that we are all something before this life, and that we will be something after it ends. It felt like some sort of energy, but a type that is outside of my own comprehension. This area of the trip is iffy to explain, because it felt like multiple timelines were happening all at once, but still connected to myself somehow. It was like I was experiencing different parts of the past, present, and future, but all within this void. It was some weird time morphing stuff that I don't clearly remember and can't explain because, well, I have a monkey brain. But eventually, things did start to iron themselves back out. After this, I heard a beautiful sound. The void began being filled with flashing neon lights until an enormous moth flew by, singing a song made out of the vibrations of the universe. It had an otherworldly feel to it, and I was in pure awe. Each flap of its wings would fill my body in a feeling of being nurtured, as if this moth was my mother. Its general presence just put me in a state of pure bliss and comfort. And finally, I was not alone. After it flew by, I was sad. Sad that I would most likely never see it again, but happy that I was able to witness such a powerful creature with my own eyes. The void began to return to typical acid closed-eye visuals. I just soaked in what had just happened to me, and after reflecting for a while, I reached a meditative state where I had no more thoughts and was just completely content with everything and its existence. It was as if my mind was rewarding me for going through its gauntlet. I just felt happy. Here's what I learned. This was the first real time I've ever gone into a trip trying to gain one specific thing, and for me, it worked out amazingly. I realised that no matter where in my life I am, my energy is connected to something greater. I'm not saying that there is a heaven or God, but more so that everything in existence is linked to some vibration or something along those lines. There has always been a universe, and I am just a little combination of space specks for a small amount of time, and eventually I will go back to the source of everything. On top of this, I also learnt that I need to just stop every now and then to take it all in. It's honestly crazy that we just exist in the first place. We have no reason to be here, but that is what makes us more interesting. It's like none of this could have even happened in the first place. The universe as we know it may have just decided not to make itself. It is so very, very crazy that I get to experience this small pinprick of existence in this infinitely huge universe. Even if our existence is meaningless, I think it's still cool that we happened at all. I feel like my purpose is to help others understand their purpose, but without being able to understand my own. This was a completely different experience overall than my 9-tab trip, and I think it had to do with the whole setting and intention thing. It helped ground me for the majority of the trip, and was something I could keep pushing for, unlike just being lost in hyperspace because, well, I have self-control issues. That trip I got taken to this line that was made up of vibrations and sound, but for this trip, it was just the void. Now that I think about it, I may have blacked out for a little while in the void, before the moth came, but even so, I'm not exactly sure. I'm definitely going to keep this in mind for when I try NN-DMT and 5-MeO-DMT. Hopefully, one of these two will show me what the source of all this energy and universe vibration really is. I'm happy now. Hopefully, for good. I wrote down in my notes that we are all part of the process. I'm not completely sure what I meant of that, but you can have fun philosophizing it. I also thought it was cool to add that I saw the outline of a moth made with golden zippers when I meditated on 20 Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds, as well as seeing butterfly wings made up of patterns throughout some of my many acid trips over the years. Maybe it's my spirit animal, or something like that. If anyone else has had a similar experience to this, please let me know. an 800 microgram trip report posted to the LSD subreddit 2 years ago by the user GiftWilling. I'm still tripping pretty hard. I took this at 8 PM, and as I'm writing this, it's 3:26 AM. For those interested in the details, anyone that sees my post history will know I'm a seasoned psychonaut, and know that I'm not bluffing about dosage or the things I'm about to share. 8D music is absolutely insane to listen to at this dose. It was like being at a super crisp clear concert. It was like my consciousness was a 3D sound wave, and I became this sphere of sound. The sound was absolutely insane, and that was with regular AirPods. For you guys wondering, I swear to God the visuals for the first 3 hours were overwhelming. An hour in, and the sacred floral patterns were so overwhelming I couldn't see my hands anymore. It's incredibly beautiful and divine, however. The patterns and sacred geometry are overwhelming at peak. It's almost some DMT level stuff. A beautiful, terrifying sight to say the least. It can be extremely confusing as to what you're seeing or what's going on. Your reality is incredibly fractalized, whether your eyes are opened or closed. The peak was absolutely terrifying. Things got extremely weird and ego dissolution was unavoidable, as expected at this dose. I remember stumbling into my bedroom and getting down on my knees and thinking to myself that I was grateful to experience life and have a consciousness in the first place. It was by now that the sacred geometry and fractals were extremely overwhelming. Sounds were melting together, and my body felt nearly non-existent. I got this visual of a feathered creature with eyes all over the wings. This creature was gargantuan in size. It literally spanned miles and miles, and there were millions, if not billions, of eyes. I had seen biblically accurate angels before, so this wasn't necessarily deviant. However, this one that appeared didn't have the same divine presence I was used to feeling with other angels, such as the wheels within wheel or Ophanim angels I saw in 400 micrograms, or a beautiful 6-winged seraphim I saw in 1300 micrograms. This one was different though. It started giving me all this knowledge. At that point in time, I literally knew everything and anything. It was crazy. The answers weren't what I thought they were, and it was insanely surreal. I was everything and knew all of existence. I was amazed at how this being was able to give me so much information at once. We started talking, but the conversation became insanely weird. I can't even recall what they were about, but we discussed these super abstract philosophical concepts, literally conversations beyond any fathomable concepts any man could conceive. I don't even remember how the conversation went verbatim. I just remembered this all ending with the feathered creature telling me all this could be mine if I accepted I was God. I told him I wasn't God, and he argued back several reasons why I was. He started to become aggressive, and after I rejected his proposal, he literally spent what felt like literal eons torturing me, going through every single bad thing I had done in my lifetime, and mentally tormenting me about it. I literally remember looking at the time on my phone, which said 10:27, and this pathetic demon or Satan himself was dragging me back into this timeless eternal hell of torture, keeping me trapped in this timeless mental loop pit. I was literally stuck here for a literal decade, if not centuries. I'm not even exaggerating here. I was hyper aware of everything that was happening. Every single moment, every second between a second, this evil demon tortured me for every sin I had committed. It told me in the most intricate ways how I couldn't be forgiven and there was no way out. I looked up again to see only 1 minute had passed. It was 10:28. I'd taken this 800 microgram dosage with a few close friends and girlfriend in our apartment. We were all intoxicated, but I was the only one on LSD. While all of this was happening, I appeared normal to everyone that was there. They only perceived me as staring off into space occasionally before regrouping with them to continue our conversation. Under the surface, I was fighting this interdimensional mental battle with this satanic being that was abusing me forever. After what felt like ages, it eventually left me alone, angry that I didn't want to accept its teachings. The rest of the trip was incredibly pleasant, I must say, and the come down was a great reliever to that hell-like peak I'd just been through. I had an amazing time with everyone that was over that night. 9 hours in, I still have involuntary synesthesia. My body feels like it has very undefined boundaries at times. Those that trip will know what I'm talking about. I'd say at the moment, 4:18 AM, my come down looks a lot like what a 300 microgram peak would look like. I will say that I made a huge mistake treating 800 micrograms as a recreational dose with friends around. But I must say that while the set and the people that are here tonight were amazing, this was definitely the wrong setting. Everyone was getting fucked up and high, and I took this drug having the let's get high mentality instead of my more cautious outlook with acid that I normally use. While some moments were incredibly euphoric and heavenly, I had a scary peak that taught me a lot more about this substance that I thought I already knew everything about. I went in a bit overconfident and cocky, thinking since I had a dozen trips, including a 7-gram APE trip under my belt, and acid trips ranging up to 400 micrograms, that I could probably handle my shit at 800. I'd taken an accidental outlier dose of liquid LSD at 1300 micrograms that was actually super incredible and positive. That's what initially made me want to explore and map the territory I missed between 400 and 1300. So initially I didn't think there was harm at starting somewhere approximately in the middle. As stated earlier, while on the surface I appeared as a normal person, or as normal as someone can appear while high as fuck tripping, there was so much going on internally. I now understand why someone would kill themselves on a bad acid trip. I was really grateful to have friends and an amazing girlfriend to keep me roped into reality. Shit could have gotten very dark if they weren't there. While this wasn't necessarily a bad trip, it had moments in it that were terrible. I literally experienced heaven and hell on this trip. It made me develop a lot more respect for LSD. While I've always had respect for psychedelics, I'll make sure to keep in mind to definitely watch the set and setting carefully next time. This was the first time I ever treated acid in a recreational setting with the intent of getting lit with my friends, thinking I could handle it all based on past experiences, and truly got my ass handed to me. Please treat acid with respect, even if you're experienced with it. Set, setting, and intent, these all play huge roles in how your trip will play out. It took me quite a while to type this all. It's now 5:22. The trip is reminiscent of a 200 microgram peak and fading visuals. I'm sorry for any grammatical errors. I'm high and very tired.
A 600 microgram LSD trip report, sent in by a subscriber. Some context before I begin this report. It's taken some time for me to be able to properly digest the whole thing. I did the trip originally in March of 2022, and only recently do I feel I have digested enough of it without it bringing me into a panic attack. Some things to consider. I'm a high-functioning autistic, so I don't know if that has a different effect when taking psychedelics, but here we go. The reason I was going so deep into psychedelics was because it allows you to see beyond the veil. Most of my life I've been in my own head, shutting myself off from the world and choosing when to interact. Because of this, I wasn't exactly good with socialising. Stuff like body language and tone always eluded me, so I wanted to see what this trip could show me. I just grabbed some tabs from one of my good friends at the time. She blotted them herself in front of me, so I knew it was safe, and she'd tripped plenty already off them. I recently tripped from the tabs off her, and it was 300 micrograms. It only felt like a light haze, almost like I'm baked with a bit more anxiety. So this time, I wanted to try and actually trip. I told her that the last batch barely worked, so I'll probably double up this time for 600 micrograms. Keep in mind though, that my trip experience was fuck all at this point. 3 low dose mushroom trips, and that 300 microgram one. So I wasn't expecting hell to break loose at all. I was expecting a trip that was controllable and chill, because that's what my last trips led me to believe. At low doses, your input can control the trip, but not this. I got home and I have this weird feeling in the back of my mind not to do it, but I was really curious. I've always wondered what is beyond the veil. Now, let me just say your ignorance is a blessing, because good lord, I tripped fucking balls. I was with my girlfriend on Discord, and for most of my trips, I end up doing an all-nighter. There's a time I don't get bothered and I can just chill without interruption. I wanted the tabs to work, so I remember taking all 6 of them, putting them under my tongue and sucking them. I said to them, "Show me what you can then," and good lord, never ask that. I just rolled a joint, not knowing that it jump-starts the trip. So within around what felt like 20 minutes, I felt as if all my skin was euphoric and everything I touched would give me a sense of pure ecstasy, from my old bedding to my clothes. It felt so good. I remember telling my girlfriend all of this as well. It was all really enjoyable, until it became incredibly overwhelming, like I was getting too much information for my brain to handle. Then all of a sudden, I felt something become incredibly wrong. I told my girlfriend something is going very, very wrong. She didn't want to say it might be a bad trip, so she just reassured me. For one of the few times in my life, I felt instinctively that I needed my mother. If I didn't see her, shit is going to go really bad. Bless her fucking soul. I come in and I'm starting to peak at about an hour-ish. I say, "Hey, I think something's going wrong," finding it weird to speak, and she started to become really worried, because I told her I was tripping beforehand. I was sitting on a laminate floor, and I remember the heat being sucked out of me into the floor, and I said I'm feeling really cold, and was debating a trip killer. My mum encourages the trip killer once I get into her bed. I'm still so cold, wrapped in her blanket and dressing gown, but I'm freezing, even though I'm hot. My mum gave me the trip killer with some cold coffee, and as soon as the trip killer entered with the cold coffee, I saw my visual cortex overlay over my reality, and I was so fucking confused. It was like a daydream clear as day over the world in front of me. It was Dante's Inferno, specifically the bottom of hell where it freezes over. As soon as I see this, I went into temperature shock, and I said to my mum, I feel like I'm in a blizzard. At one point, her boyfriend was really worried about me, and said, "You need to be careful bro, you could end up in a psych ward." Then, I went into a full panic, imagining myself in an asylum, my life wasted as I rot, going insane. All the while, I can feel as if my whole being is being smashed through a grate, and I said that through my anxiety to my mum. At this point in the trip, it's getting really intense. My mum said, "Do you have any cigarettes? Well, I'll look after you." And I felt so bad that she had to deal with this. I was like, "You can have them all if you please help me." I was saying this beyond just being her son. I said it to her as someone you love. Please help me. I was pretty much begging her. Then my mental state started to rapidly regress, and I started behaving like I would when I was 4. My mum was stroking my hair and singing, and I remember saying to myself that pride doesn't matter in this situation. All of it vanished, and I returned to a 4-year-old mindset, just wanting my mother to help me. It was what my brain deemed as comfortable in this time to cope through. She sang a song I hadn't heard since my childhood, and it really was fucking beautiful. I was crying hearing it again. I was so aware of my senses at this point that I could oddly pick up things way out of my awareness. Like a guy yelling in the street, I instinctively knew he wasn't mad, he was just fucking about 5 seconds later, and I heard him laughing. The acid is so strong at this point, and I can tell it's pissed with me. I remember it wanted my ego, and I was like, "No, please God, no." I imagined my mind in a steel box chained up, and that acid was busting down my door to open it. My mum then went into my room with me and proceeded to hug me in my bed and protect me. I had a massive fear of disappearing beforehand, making me mortified by the idea of not death, but the complete erasure of my existence. I could tell the trip was getting stronger at this point, and I was praying for the trip killer to kick in, because I could feel the desync between my consciousness and my body occurring. After dealing with that for God knows how long, I felt my awareness snap back, and my mind became somewhat clearer as the trip killer kicked in. But I wasn't home free yet. The acid was still pissed off with me, grilling me over the fact that I shouldn't be fucking around with this at all. It wasn't saying this in words, but clear meaning, in a feeling of sorts. And I was so sorry. I was like, okay, I understand not fucking with fire again if I can get out of this. I'll be forever responsible, please. Still fearing my existence being erased, I was completely in shock at this point, saying to my mum I'm so cold and I'm sweating. I think the temperature change is a neurological response, I said to my mum. Even though I didn't know anything about that, I was sure that was why I was having such a shock at this point. I was so afraid of death that I thought I was just going to die there on the spot. But at this point, I had a weird entity come forward. They didn't show themselves, but I could feel their presence by my side. The vibe they were giving off was one of pure worry. It's weird to describe what these entities are, but imagine meeting something in your dreams and you communicate with them in the dream world. It was like that. I couldn't see him, but I felt them instinctively. They showed me something on my mind to do with fear. He stepped through a doorway, and as he stepped through, his body kept changing into a different person. And the message I received is that we don't truly die, we keep going on. That had managed to calm me down significantly, to the point that my mum was able to leave my room at 4 AM. She needed sleep, and I couldn't blame her. She'd been looking after me for so long. I remember apologising over and over again to her until it annoyed her. At this point in time, I was alone and scared, and the concept of time didn't quite make sense at all. I remember not wanting any music playing because it would make it worse. The sensory overload would make me spiral into something I didn't have the ability to deal with. So I put on a podcast to focus on their voices. While this is all happening, my facial muscles are seizing in certain areas, and I can't move them no matter what I do. From the moment I was in my mum's room, I kept seeing the chemical compound for LSD floating and moving through my brain matter. It was like it was overlaid on my vision, like the daydream took on a form of its own. My brain right now is like a synthesizer, firing off all sorts of auditory hallucinations. Specifically, I kept hearing Tyler 1 vocoded to Rage the Meme. I finally managed to call my girlfriend, who carried on the shift of looking after me. Then, something really earth-shattering occurred. I was laying with my head on the pillow, when I flew out of my own eyes, and felt completely detached from my own body. I was in this weird place that couldn't be seen normally. It was as if everything had a wire outline around it, and the colours were just black and white. Imagine echolocation visualised. And I was a droplet, and I kept dripping into this endless ocean, and kept dripping and dripping and dripping. It felt as if I was in a Tsukuyomi, and my sense of time was gone. I felt like I had been dripping for eternity. My whole sense of self had been ripped away from me, and I felt as if this was my true essence, with none of the outward stimuli from my world. During this time, I felt as if another entity was dropping me into the ocean, keeping an eye on me but making sure not to get involved. I felt him in that space with me, like he was taking notes. I finally came back to my body, and I said to my girlfriend, laughing a little, "So, that's what an ego death is." Fully surprised that I knew what an ego death even was. It was strange that my instincts knew it was clear as day. I was still tripping hard afterwards and had a lot of weird other experiences, like the coding for me turned into a flip note that was rapidly flipped like an animation flip pad, until it said my name, version 2.0. Lots of visual hallucinations as well at this point from coming back, and that notepad was just clear as day. Not long after this, I remember realising something. That I wasn't alone in my own mind, and that myself had been split up. I could see it within my mind. There were like 5 other me's, all with their own feelings. I was looking in my mind, I could see they were all just chilling in a room playing games. I was like, that was a fucking weird trip. Then one of my other selves chimed in saying, "Yeah, I'd rather kill myself than do that again." He said this in a joking manner, and I just started to laugh over it. It was like I was interacting with myself in such a new way, like these parts are just as alive as me. I've been a loner most of my life, so when I found out that self isn't just one, it made me feel so comforted, like I will never truly be alone in the world. I finally managed to steady myself, and I remember one of the main things I ended up saying to my girlfriend. She was having really bad pain in her toes, and I said, Your toes are grounding me right now," and just started laughing. I realised at this point the trip was calming down. I was able to have some fun with it for once. Dad jokes had a great effect on grounding me. I kept laughing over how shit they were. My girlfriend looked after me as long as she could, until she finally had to go to bed. She was in a lot of pain at the time. So, I was alone again, tripping as well. But still I managed to find my way to sleep, and my trip persisted into my dreams. I began communicating with humans in my dreams through a language of sucking the roof of my mouth. I was doing it outside the dream as well. I remember I'd done it so much that I woke up with the muscle memory and was still doing it uncontrollably. I woke up the next morning extremely drained from everything, and all my facial muscles were so sore from being seized in place for so long. But I remember instinctively that I don't think there is a fear in this world that can compare to that. Since then, I've been processing this trip. It was incredibly horrible because I got overloaded with information of reality, and the sense of grounding was ripped right away from me. I had to seal away some of the trip memories in my mind and just focus on recovering for a while. My anxiety had skyrocketed to an all-time high. At this point, I thought I'd broken myself. However, after giving myself plenty of time, and oddly for once in my life, not ignoring my own issues and listening to what I need, I was able to recover from it and digest the information that was given. The meaning varies for the trip, and it can't exactly be pinpointed as to what it was. I did notice though that after about 6 months after the trip, the anxiety started to waver. I was thinking in such a different way, like the fog had been lifted, and I could access information in my brain at such a rapid rate now, and at first it was disorientating, but now it's calmed down. Body language and tone have become so much more clearer, and alongside this, I can tell when someone is annoyed or what emotion they are displaying just by tone. Being able to interact on second nature easily is just so nice. I can actually understand rather than break it down in my own head, trying to figure out what their displaying means. A great analogy for this that I came up with is that people with autism are brought into this world with an empty map, and you fill it in based on experience compared to others who already have a lot filled in already. This can be stuff like maturing slower than others, not understanding social situations, or having a general problem with communicating. It takes hard lessons to learn them. Before I had somewhat of a decent map, not entirely filled out, and it was tricky. But after this, it's like my map has exploded and become full on detailed. I feel like I've matured 3 years after that trip. It's weirdly disorientating, but I'm getting used to it. I've tried to explain the trip to its fullest here, but just keep in mind that I've had to process this for 9 months or so, just so that I don't have a panic attack when thinking about it, so the details might be a little hazy. So yeah, that's my trip report. Love any comments you guys have for this. Let me know. A Journey to the Multiverse Within. A 1500 microgram LSD trip report, sent in by a subscriber. So I decided to finally submit my report. This is quite a detailed one, and I've tried to include as much as I could remember. One final thing though before I start. I apologise in advance for any grammatical mistakes and such, and I certainly don't mean to impose my views and or rationality on anyone in any form. I'm simply just presenting my own experience and my own thoughts regarding the matter. So, let's begin. The setup. I've always been curious about acid. I wondered what it would be like to hallucinate. Would I see the things with my own eyes, or would it be more like a visual imagination? Finally, it was the time to know. It was around 9 PM. I was with my best friend, let's call him K, and one of his friends as well, who we'll call O. We were at a beach, Kalangut Beach, Goa, India. I got the paper, which the dealer promised me is 1500 micrograms in total, and asked me only to eat one half, otherwise I'd been mad messed up, to quote his words. But of course, I ate the whole thing. I took the paper and sucked on it. As time passed, we became curious about what would happen and when.
Kay thought the dealer tricked us, and that was just a plain paper with some colours on it. About an hour of sitting there, I felt weird, and told Kay that something was kicking in. He seemed sceptical, and thought I was only saying that to justify to myself that I wasn't cheated. The onset. I felt sand on the beach racing about, trying to come up from the surface. I looked up and saw stars that started moving. K and O were still thinking I'm trying to show off just to cover up because the guy had scammed us. I got up and roamed about on the beach, and then hands started coming out from the sand. They were grabbing me, trying to pull me down into it. I was skipping the sand and jumping here and there to avoid being grabbed. I looked up and the stars all turned green and were shooting these green beams of light down to the beach. I lay down and saw them moving fast, creating a 3D wireframe of green lights while shooting green beams down below. As I looked again towards the horizon, in the dark shade of sea, I saw mountain tops peaking at the end. Then, I saw a Colossus Buddha lying sideways, where there were mountains just a moment before. I asked Kay to take me back to our hotel, because I realised it was going to get out of hand real soon. Putting my hands over his shoulder, we left for the hotel, me still trying to avoid being caught by those hands which were coming out from the sand. Prelude. Just as we got out of the sand onto the road, a slow, soft music started to play, and everything felt in slow motion. Pedestrians were disappearing, and colourful lights began to cover my view. Our hotel was in a dark alley near to the beach, about a 5 minutes walk. When we got there, I had totally lost all my motor skills, and was completely relying on Kay to take me to the rooms safely. Just before we were about to enter the hotel, I had to close my eyes because the lights and colours I saw were so intense that I felt I'd go blind if I kept looking at them. It felt like staring into the sun, but with millions of colours instead of just yellow, and it covered my whole peripheral vision. When we finally entered the room, that's when the trip really started to step up. The journey. Inception. In the room, I could open my eyes. The intensity of light decreased tremendously. There were faces coming out from the walls, all kinds of faces. Mostly animals with sharp teeth, wolves, dogs, demons, dragons and whatnot. The floor tiles started to break and move apart. I lay on the bed and the music got so intense, and this cloud formed over my head and started dripping blood. K&O was sitting in the terrace while I laid there on the bed. I felt highly dehydrated and was drinking whenever I felt conscious, which was about every 20 to 30 minutes. About 2 to 3 hours in, I remember no concept of time, I'm just telling the time of events as per what K&O told me later. I felt quite hungry, because we haven't had dinner at all. I went to the terrace and grabbed a piece of a roll that Kay was eating. But just as I looked outside, I saw a T-Rex coming from behind the tree, and I dropped the roll and went inside to save my life, as I was sure he was coming to eat me. Story 1. After that T-Rex came to eat me, I ran inside and lay on the bed again. Then, I saw there were people around me, doctors in their white coats, performing some sort of procedure or something. They cut my stomach open, and the only light I could see was the one they shine on the patient's organs. They were discussing something. Then, it all went blank. After a while, I remember it was a dark night, and there were no lights whatsoever. I was in a graveyard, and I was carrying a large cross sign. Story 2. After that graveyard scene, everything went blank. I gained my consciousness again, and had some water. Kay was worried sick, and he was searching on the net what to do to calm an acid peak and whatnot. He asked me if I was alright, but I couldn't put together any words. The music hadn't faded, but the intensity of it had slowed down. I lay down again on the bed, and shot once again into another world. I don't know how to really describe it, but if any of you have played Batman Arkham Asylum, then there's a scene with Scarecrow where he's in space, with fragments of ruins from houses scattered around in the form of a circle, of which Scarecrow was in the middle. Batman must hide from his vision while reaching for the last point to kill the Scarecrow. Well, I was there. I was the Bat-fucking-Man. I saw the Scarecrow and I had to save my life. I don't know how I saved my life though. After a long time of escaping his vision and jumping around, I again went blank. Story 3. I once again gained consciousness for a while. O was asleep. Kay was just lying there. My motor skills were better. I went to pee and washed my face, but the shape morphing and everything else was still there. I called my girlfriend, which took over 10 minutes to dial, and told her that all this shit was happening to me. She got crazy worried, but Kay talked to her and ensured that he was taking care of me. I sloughed on the bed again, and as I lay down and closed my eyes, the peak took over me, and I got lost in another vision. This time, there was a huge staircase in the middle of nowhere. Just a spiral staircase and some people on it at different levels. The camera zoomed in, and it focused on an old guy. And guess what? That old guy was none other than me. Just as the focus was on his, or my face, there was also a waiter carrying coffee, and he bumped into me and spilled the coffee all over me. The camera again zoomed out to put the whole staircase into view, and then zoomed in again, this time focusing on the waiter. And, sort of unexpectedly, that waiter is also me. Now, as I was descending the stairs, a kid bumped into me that made me spill the coffee on that old man, who, again, was me. It zoomed out once again to get the whole staircase in view, and started zooming in again. But this time, the focus was on the kid, and to no surprise, that kid was me. I was playing with a bouncy ball. I was trying to catch it when I was running, and I bumped into the waiter that made him spill his coffee on the old me. Finally, again the view was all zoomed out to cover the whole staircase, and this time while it zoomed in, it focused on an infant in his mother's arms who was feeding on her breast. And, to no one's surprise, that infant was also only me. Interlude. After this part, I gained some sense of consciousness. I had water, went to pee again, and peed a lot. As I was coming back from the restroom, I noticed that our hotel room was flying in space, shattered into pieces, with nothing but void all around it. I sat on the terrace and smoked a cigarette by myself. Kay and O were both asleep. I went to bed again and decided to lie down. Ego death and meeting the source. It's been more than a year, but my hands still shiver as I think about that moment and try to put that down in words. I'll try my best to recreate it, but no matter how hard I try, I'm sure I cannot exactly put how I feel into words. This time when I lay down, my eyes close. I saw stickman figures, more like that gingerbread man figure in Shrek. It was all black except for them, and there were a lot of them, in green colour. They were joining hands to form a circle while their legs spread outwards. It was a bit like when a father swings his child by his hands and his legs spread outward with the force. Their legs were in that position, and they're all coming from outwards to join hands and become one. First, there was only one circle like this, and there were more, lots of them, everywhere. The music that was playing is inexplicable. It felt like my brain was about to orgasm. Then the circle came down, zooming in at infinite speed, and took my hands to join them too. But just as soon as I held the hands, the circle moved back up again, taking me up with them, moving in a spiral inward motion, concentrating to a single point. But then, I lost my hands. It felt thwarting. But then, they came back down again, taking me again by my hands, and like them,
I was a gingerbread man too. They came down and took me again, and we all, in this circle, and all others in their respective circles, started to move spirally inward, trying to collapse into a single point. But again, I had lost my hands. It was as if you were in a video game and you're in a final boss fight. You just keep losing and losing and losing. But you know you are about to win. This is about to end. Well, I felt just like that. And I knew I was at the verge of something big. I could feel it. The anticipation was running extreme. And then, the cycle repeated. It all came down again. I joined hands, and we started moving inward in spiral direction. But this time, I didn't let go. And fuck, I died. Just when I merged with them, and we concentrated into a single infinitesimal point of oneness, my brain filled with what I can easily say is 1,000 orgasms. And then, it all went blank. Nothingness. Void, death, life, abyss. Everything and nothing all together. The whole concept of humanity, life, death, love and hate faded into pure nothingness. And that one infinitesimally small point was the source. It was what empowered the whole creation and existence of not only the humanity, but the whole universe. After that, I don't remember a thing. I don't know how long I was out. I don't know how I came back. As per though, K and O, as I passed out, worried them sick. They wondered if I was dead or not. My heart was beating, but I was totally unconscious. I regained my conscious, according to them, after about half an hour or so. This was around 6 in the morning. The final chapter. After coming back from the ego death, I wasn't talking to anybody. I was just observing things around me. Each and everything seemed so beautiful that I cannot find words to define it. About 7 AM in the morning, I was standing on the terrace, and the sun was just rising. To this day, I have not witnessed a more beautiful sunrise in my entire life. I could feel the air blowing through my hairs. I could see the grass. I appreciated the tiny little insects that were there in the room. When I saw the sun, I felt life, the meaning, love, and the sense of oneness. I could feel every single ray of sun hitting me, and hitting millions of things and people on this earth, giving birth to life as we know it. Just as I was witnessing this miracle of life, I decided to smoke another joint. But when I was done with that, the hallucinations started up again, and I had this urge to lie down on the bed once more. My eyes closed, and this time I saw waves, a bit like those in mathematics, sine and cosine waves, and those waves were inside a huge auditorium and were slowly ascending. I saw people sitting there by the sides of the walls, smoking, talking, laughing, and I remember thinking to myself, holy shit, people live there? What is this place? Who are these people? And then the waves continued, leading me to the room, and then the doors of the room opened. And again, my mind went completely blank. I don't remember what or whom I saw in that room. I just remember waking up after about an hour. After my death, born again, with a new spirit like that of a newborn baby. Conclusion and aftermath. Even though I have tried to put in every single detail of my trip, or at least as much as I can remember, I know I can never put in words the feeling that I had in the trip. There's a saying that curiosity killed the cat, but I don't know how many know the full version of it, which is curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. This is exactly what happened to me. I was just doing it for fun, and just to see what it feels like to see visions. But it ended up changing my life more than anything ever did, or anything could ever do. I was already an atheist, but now I realize that the universe, the atoms, are all nothing but one. And our purpose is only restrained by our own self-absorbed human dogma, while the universe, life, and the existence itself is a much bigger reality. Accidentally taking more than a 10 strip of LSD, a trip report by the user SKYRIM posted to the Psychonauts subreddit 5 years ago. Prologue. I'd received some gel tabs for really cheap, because the gel itself had melted away, and my plug couldn't sell them because he didn't know the dosage, so he just ended up selling it all to me. I'd gone to a rave about a week before and took 2 little slivers of the dose. I knew the tabs were originally 200 micrograms each, and I wanted to start low and feel it out, in addition to 2 points of M, after testing both of course. And to be honest, the effects were a bit underwhelming. This made me conclude that the dose had been weakened due to being exposed to enough heat for it to melt. The night of the trip. I recall it being a relatively normal night. I was just playing video games and chilling, and I remembered the gel I had in my freezer. I decided that tonight I would like to trip a little harder. I assumed that since I had underwhelming effects at the rave, that the acid was weak, so I thought I should take all of what I have left. And this is where I messed it up. I placed a chunk under my tongue and took a deep breath, excited for the journey to come. About 30 minutes later, I knew something was off. I began feeling overwhelmingly nauseous and hot, and the body load felt like gravity was being increased by increments of 50% every 5 minutes. When it hadn't even been half an hour, and I saw an incredibly intricate pattern on my wall, I knew I'd fucked up. I started stripping myself naked, literally becoming the naked guy on a lot of acid. I was completely overheating and trying to keep it together as this brutal come-up continued. I'd taken a half-gram dab on a 10 strip before, so I was no stranger to deep acid trips. But when you're not prepared for it, it can be a little difficult to handle. I sat there dry heaving over an empty popcorn bowl and downing water. My heart was pounding so hard that I could actually feel it in my face, feeling the intensity rise to completely unfathomable levels. After the come-up had passed, I began to feel much better. I was completely blinded by the most intense visuals I have ever seen while still being in my body. In all honesty, I almost started to lose it a little bit. I was ready for like 500 micrograms max, but right now I was just getting absolutely dicked down by at least a 10 strip. I'd say even about 1500 micrograms. I proceeded to put on my "The Trip is Going Downhill and That Needs to Change" songs. Parabole plus Parabola back to back by Tool, laying on my back spread eagle, just absolutely enamoured by my closed eye visuals. The visuals themselves were so serious, seemingly sacred and transcendent. It's actually very, very hard to communicate the things I saw, but I remember at one point I saw an incredibly intricate, monolithic temple-like structure that had giant pillars with energy and hieroglyphs flowing through it. Shifting geometry completely engulfed everything I would look at. I would look at my phone or my lamp, and it would take like 10 seconds of me looking at it for me to be like, oh, that's a phone. My thoughts were slowed down, and the inner monologue in my head was making every word I would think sound like this, with a lot of pitch distortion and waviness. That was a weird effect for sure.
Strangely, I didn't actually experience a full ego death, and I think that's because I wasn't going into the trip with that mindset. I never fought the trip during its whole duration. Ego death just didn't happen this time. I did, however, forget entirely that I had a body, or that I was me when I closed my eyes. So there was definitely some aspects of ego death going on, but it just wasn't like the other ego death experiences that I've had. It was like the second I closed them, I began to float away. I thought to myself, hey, I know I'm peaking right now, but if I'm already this deep, I might as well see how deep the rabbit hole goes. I took 2 30mg edibles, 1 indica and 1 sativa, and I weigh 120 with not a large tolerance. This completely kicked everything into the highest, most ridiculous level I have ever experienced on LSD. I would look at a tapestry and I could literally replicate every precise detail in my vision after I looked away, and watch it dissolve into patterns. Everything I would look at stayed in my vision for at least 3 seconds. It was like having projection vision. I spent a lot of the trip just looking at things and then looking away, watching what I was looking at being transferred into visuals in my vision, and then being eaten up by the geometry. The visuals themselves were almost on the level of DMT-like geometry. And good lord, the traces, man. It was like being able to paint in the air. I decided to time it on my phone, and my traces after waving my hand from one side of my vision to the other would last 7 seconds. That doesn't sound like a long time, but count to 7 while saying Mississippi in between each number, and imagine your traces lasting that long in complete clarity with little to no fading. It's crazy. I came to a few realizations during this trip. It brought the fact that I focused too much on the past and the future without being mindful of the present to light. The trip showed me that I need to focus on experiencing the moment and valuing even the mundane things in my life. I realised that I needed to spend more time with my family, as well as eat better, exercise more, and just generally live a more pure, wholesome life. While it was unplanned, and it was certainly fucking crazy, I'm very glad I held it together throughout the experience, and took some things away from it. I'd just like to thank you for reading, and to wish you safe travels. The Too Long Didn't Read edition. Thought the acid degraded from heat, so I took it all, and ended up blasting into the most intense trip I have ever experienced.
A 990 UG LSD trip report, uploaded to Reddit 5 years ago by Bob Nerd. I am 19 years old, 75 kilograms, and male. 7 days before I drop, I stopped drinking all coffee and energy drinks. I didn't watch any news, as it's probably not the best idea to have your mind filled with anxiety about terrorism and everything that is wrong with the world going into a trip. I also cut out TV series, movies, and cut all contact to toxic people in my life. I also started to study a lot about Buddhism. I read 2 books from Alan Watts, one from Eckhart Tolle, and read about all kinds of yogis, mystics, and other spiritual people and their experiences. 2 days beforehand, I got a few snacks, including peaches, ice cream, some sweets, and salt crackers. 9 hours beforehand. I have slept a bit before, but I decided to take another nap to have more mental energy during the trip. 6 hours beforehand. I have a light meal, including some fruit juice and cereal with lactose-free milk, because I'm not about having a tummy full of air for a trip. 3 hours beforehand. I do all my chores and get everything out of the way that could distract me during the trip. Also, I get my snacks ready and cut the peaches in smaller parts. 1 hour beforehand. I start putting on some really relaxing music and go into a somewhat meditative chill mode. 10 minutes beforehand. I do some light stretching and move a bit around since I'm not planning to move for a while after that. 0 hours. The drop. I had 4 by 220 UG and 1 by 110 UG tabs, and these were high quality and tested by a friend who had the same batch. 5 minutes in. I take a pic and post it on Reddit. Also, the dissolving paper leaves a somewhat disgusting texture in my mouth. 20 minutes. Till now I have chilled on Reddit and got comfy in my bed. Note that I spend the whole trip on my bed. The tabs got somewhat annoying, so I decided to flush them down with some water. Weirdly, I already noticed some effects. From one moment to another, I notice how it feels like I'm sinking deeper and deeper into my bed, although I'm not moving at all. 30 minutes. After looking at my wall for a few seconds, suddenly all the small dots on it, it's got those weird little pimples on it, turned into pictures, and I saw an ancient Buddhist temple in a forest. Not in colours or like an actual picture, just that the dots formed the outlines. 1 hour. I should note that those times have been pretty accurate till now, but at this point I'm starting to lose all sense of time, so from now on there will be rough estimates by me. At this point I feel it really intensely. All my senses are getting very strange. I can hear very far away conversations from the outside. Everything feels extremely soft, including the wall, and my vision begins to start splitting stuff into their base colours, which was very odd. 1 hour and 10 minutes. I'm taking another sip of water to get that taste of cardboard out of my mouth and go into meditation. Almost immediately after closing my eyes, I go into a trance, and hundreds of thoughts come up. I can't remember even 5% of them thoughts, but I know that some have been pretty amazing insights. I also do remember how sitting there with my eyes closed, no music playing anymore, I could mentally start to turn on any song and it sounded real. I even listened to a very complicated classical piece in which I could tweak every instrument and it sounded amazing. 3 hours. I get out of the trance, open my eyes, and I'm completely lost. I have no idea where I am. After sitting there for 10 minutes, I realised that I took a drug and that I'm in my room. That helped me calm down a bit, but I still felt like I was going insane. Literally. My whole paradigm of what reality is didn't exist anymore. I tried to come up with a new map of reality, but after finding one, I almost immediately lost it. I know this probably doesn't make sense to a lot of you, but maybe some experienced trippers will know what I mean. I realised that there was nothing wrong with what was happening, and I stopped looking for answers, which turned out to be the 100% best decision I could have made. After I stopped gripping to reality, an extremely pleasant feeling of relief hit me. I had no worries, and didn't see my physical body as myself. I think the Buddha once said, "No self, no problem." And at this point, the concept of a self or an ego made zero sense to me, and I decided to go back into meditation. 4 hours in. This is where stuff gets pretty insane. I started not having just closed eye visuals. I could see through my closed eyes. I should note at this point that I was somehow able to keep my mind blank for some time now, and I kid you not, it felt like I was sitting there for 3 to 5 days. During that time, I felt like I was experiencing what Buddhists would probably call dhyana. After that, so much stuff happened that I could write a book about it. I'm going to tell you only about the highlights though, since this is already long as fuck. Got extremely spiritual. I kinda struggled to meditate, and there were these enlightened masters around me who were extremely calm and told me how to have peace of mind. I pretty much just had to follow their lead. I started to think that I am now going to experience the universe. And by universe, I mean every single atom, every plant, every human life, just everything possible. I was somewhat excited for that journey, but I asked the enlightened master how long it will take, and he said that he was doing this for around 200 years now and is at roughly 1%, which is pretty impressive. I mean, 1% out of infinity is still infinity, right? Anyways, I asked if there isn't a quicker way, and he smiled at me and brought me to the Buddha. The enlightened master told me that Buddha has experienced every kind of pleasure and every kind of pain in this world. I was thinking, whoa, every kind of pain. But this motherfucker had the biggest grin on his face I've ever seen. So the Buddha guided me to a bunker-like dam with a very big door. So I stood there alone in front of the door, and before I could knock, a giant ghost-like spirit person that looked somewhat like this image opened the door. I asked what this place was, and he told me with a big compassionate smile that this is the library of all knowledge, and so he guided me to the books of knowledge. Me being a small as fuck human being, and this library being gigantic, the spirit quickly gave me the ability to fly. He opened the book, and it hit me. Enlightenment. I have seen all beauty in life. Now, I have no idea how to explain this feeling or experience. The book just answered all my questions and made everything clear, and I realised that everything is the way it should be. I also could be completely wrong, to be honest, but in that moment it sure as hell felt like being enlightened, and I also had the feeling that this experience would last, which it didn't over the long term. But anyways, this book gave me the ability to teleport to any location on the planet, experience the world how it really is, not through our senses, which by the way was a lot of extremely powerful and colourful energies, and there were only structures, no individual objects. Also, what I want to mention is that this spirit looked at me with the greatest compassion and love and acceptance I have ever received, and I asked the spirit how I achieve a spiritually successful life. The spirit replied with, "Just look at all the signs around you. United States, European Union, United Nations, Wi-Fi connection." Lamau, I swear while tripping this sounded like a very deep insight. Well, what do I know? Maybe it is, lol. T plus 7 hours. I get out of my meditation and notice how the effects are declining, although still tripping pretty hard. I notice that I'm getting somewhat hungry, and I start eating the peaches. More of that later, lol. After that, I take some notes of what has happened on a piece of paper, and I notice how the letters and lines are dancing all around. After that, I go back into meditation and listen to the birds tweet. It's early in the morning by now. Far away, I hear some kind of generator running. No idea for what. In my mind, it sounds like a stock exchange with sounds. Each sound source is trading its sounds to another one, and they're kind of arguing about the price. I know this probably doesn't make a lot of sense. T plus 9 hours. I open my eyes and puke. Fuck. I puked in my newly bought sweater, and some of it got on my bed. Oh well, time to clean it up. What's notable though, is that I'm pretty sure that the drug itself didn't make me puke. It's the fact that I didn't chew the peaches. At this point I remember that I just swallowed them one after another. Ah well, at least all that came out is some water and pieces of peaches. It didn't even smell bad. So I get a ton of paper towels, try to get everything dry and put my sweater into the shower, wash it off and leave it there. To get rid of the stomach acid taste though, I get some ice cream from downstairs, and what I realise at this point is that I am still tripping a lot. I've still got insane visuals, like seeing the floor tiles swim around, but at this point I kinda just accepted weird ass visuals as my new reality. From hour 9 to 13, I felt like I was on a 200 to 400 UG trip, but my mind didn't care that much. I couldn't think about anything else other than the fact that I'd just met Buddha, etc. And after being that spaced out, 200 UG felt like a bike ride compared to being strapped to a spaceship. 13 hours. Visuals pretty much stopped at this point, but I still had that focused look and saw a few brighter colours. My pupils were still huge though. During the whole day till now, I felt like I was on a microdose of LSD. Thanks to everyone sending good vibes. I know this is kinda messy, and this is my first trip report, but the trip was pretty messy as well, so I guess it fits. A delve into the depths of insanity. A 600 microgram LSD trip report sent in by BW. Pretext. This trip occurred at roughly age 20. Having just celebrated my birthday and wanting to go on a trip to remember, my friend and I, we'll call him G, picked up 6 tabs of double dipped LSD, about 200 micrograms each. Having taken LSD about 10 times before and mushrooms about 7 to 8 times, I considered myself ready to delve deeper into the depths of hallucinogenic substances. We obtained the tabs around 8 PM and went back to my house, as my parents had just left for their vacation. With an empty house and a ready mind, I took 1 tab while G took all 3 at once. Trip report. After about 30 minutes of no noticeable effects, I also decided to take the rest of the tabs to reach the level my friend was about to experience. Little did I know, at the time, this would prove to be quite the mistake. About 10 minutes later after taking the extra 2 tabs, the first effects began to hit. I noticed a subtle yet defined increase in my focus on my surroundings. Everything began to seem more vibrant, but I was not seeing any patterns yet. I was leaning back in a reclining chair inside of my living room, when a peculiar halo of colour began emanating from the TV we were watching. My friend G had just put on a National Geographic documentary, but as I leaned forward in my chair to take a closer look, I suddenly detached from my physical body, and in my leaned forward state, it still felt as though I was still leaning back against the chair with my arms crossed behind me. This immediately triggered a surge of anxiety, as at this point it was roughly 45 minutes after taking the first tab. I knew at this point that I was in for the ride of a lifetime, and attempted to calm myself down. However, realising that I was still leaning forward, yet my brain ascertained the fact I was still leaning back in the chair, my perception began to fizzle, and my heart began to race. I looked over to G, and could see the acid was already beginning to take full effect, as all he could do was stare at me blankly in response to the questions I was asking him. I wish I could give a timescale of the events yet to come, but less than an hour after taking the first tab, time lost all relative meaning. With my friend lost in an eternal 1,000-yard stare, I began to take in my surroundings. Things were beginning to shift and move as if they were aspirating, yet far more intense than I could have imagined. I was rapidly losing all sense of myself as my breathing and heart rate only continued to increase. I asked G if he wanted to step outside for a moment for a breath of fresh air, and he nodded in agreement. We got up and walked in the direction to my back porch, and that is when all perceptual hell broke loose. The door leading to my patio seemed to stretch back into infinity, and every step I took towards it seemed to last forever. After what felt like several minutes trying to walk 20 feet, we finally made it to the door. As soon as I turned the handle, it was as if a gateway to another dimension opened up. My vision splintered into what I can only describe as looking for a chain-link fence. I looked up at the sky, and in each individual square of the link, powerful fractals began spiralling back and forth as if looking straight through a kaleidoscope. It was instantaneously overpowering, and I felt myself fall forward only to catch myself on the railings, as the force of the spinning vortexes threatened to suck me in. I looked at G, speechless, and went to open the door to go back inside. As I reached for the handle, it seemed to fade away into nothingness. I was completely floored by the power of what I was feeling, and kept reaching further and further for a door handle that was rapidly evaporating into itself. In reality, we were both most likely standing in front of the door with our hands outstretched, but it was like trying to move inside of a tornado. Wisps of colour and energised air shot around me as I struggled just to reach out and grasp the freaking doorknob. As soon as my hand finally connected with the cold metal, it was as though time had stopped. The door swung open, and the rush of cold air from the air conditioning was like walking from a desert to the Arctic Circle. We made our way back through the house with great difficulty, straight hallway mind you, and returned to the chair we began from. Things only elevated from here though. The National Geographic documentary was still playing, but nothing perceivable was presented to my eyes. A cheetah flashed across the screen, but all I saw was a blur of movement passing through a scene of utter chaos. The waving Sahara grass presented itself as burning flames, and the blue sky melted into it as if it were a candle burning at its peak. Everything I looked at was melting. The walls, the floor, my body, all of it was melding into itself and withering away into ash. I stumbled my way to the bathroom, looking for any form of relief, but there was nothing that could help me now. I looked up and saw myself in the mirror, but I couldn't recognise anything. I was being completely blown into a realm of pure terror and insanity. Time meant nothing, and every second was dragged out for hours, as I witnessed myself dissolve into the mirror over and over again, only to be returned to my physical form and then stretched out again into a focal point I could not discern. I pulled myself out of the bathroom after what felt like days of breaking down into molecules in front of the mirror, and was thrown into a spiral staircase. The hallway connecting to my bathroom led into the living room and looped back through the kitchen and back into the bathroom. I became lost in this nightmare cycle of walking in literal circles at what felt like a 45-degree angle leading straight down into what I perceived to be hell. I must have walked 20 or 30 circles before my friend suddenly popped out behind a wall and grabbed me, and silently pointed towards my room. I half stumbled, half crawled my way into my bed, and G soon joined me. What happened next, I will never be able to explain. As soon as I lay down in my bed, my brain folded in on itself. I turned what felt like 720 degrees around my brainstem before I lost all form of vision and my mind was overtaken by a blank grey screen. In this blank canvas, a huge hexagonal pillar spiralled forth, covered in every sensory organ a human contains. Eyes, ears, noses and tongues covered the pillar as it sprung forth into my mind and began seeing, hearing, feeling and smelling every experience I had ever had up until this point. I felt the tongues lick across my being, eyes pierce deep into the veil of my existence, the ears listening to every thought I've ever had, and the noses sensing scents deep within my memory. I became the embodiment of perception, reliving countless moments in time where I didn't even consider the impact of my ability to sense, and felt everything I was existing within. I began to writhe and scream as memories were ripped from my consciousness and dissolved into thin air. as if flies from my brain were being sent to the recycling bin of a computer and then deleted. I begged for the feelings to stop, until out of this pillar of oblivion, a hand extended its reach. It was G grabbing my hand and telling me everything was going to be okay. And at this utterance, the pillar dissolved, and I saw what appeared to be a heart monitor line begin beeping at a constant pace, before going dim and flatlining. I heard an overpowering beeping, and all I could bring myself to do was ask G, "Are we dying?" He told me no, and the reassurance of another being's existence brought me back, if only for a moment. We were finally able to get back on our feet and proceeded again to the living room. Sat down in the chair, a pure manifestation of being humming with the tone of the universe itself. It was then I experienced what I consider the true revelation of my trip. After I sat down, I began to weep of human suffering. Death and the end of life swept over me like a colourless wave, and I begged God to be able to see my mother and father again. As I wept, a figure emerged before me and took me up in its arms. As soon as I felt its hold, I suddenly felt the most peace I have ever felt in my life. I looked up at the figure, and it appeared to be female, but it had a blank face and I could only perceive its form. Once this feeling of peace encompassed my being, I was sat down like a schoolchild at a desk and I heard the words, "Let me teach you of this life, my child," resonate through my core. They weren't spoken, rather communicated through a surge of spiritual energy, and I felt my soul vibrate to the frequency emanating from this mysterious entity. I was shown a vision of a wave, much like those of the ocean, but instead, it consisted of energy lines defined as varying colours of radiant light. I watched this wave begin and gain momentum as it continued, until finally crashing into a shore, stopping and then receding. I felt as though I'd just watched the ending of a life, until another wave crashed onto the shore, and then another. I heard, or rather felt, the entity state, "Life comes in the form of waves. You have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Yet that does not stop the other waves from coming ashore as well." I watched in repeated procession as wave after wave crashed onto the shore, coming to the conclusion that we are all waves, gathering energy as we move along, until finally we meet the end and our energy is absorbed and washed away, only to start the cycle again and again. This probably isn't exactly what I heard or witnessed, this is just my recollection afterwards. After taking this in, I was no longer worried about death as I was before. I became at peace with the thought that we are all waves of energy, and after we die, that energy does not disappear, but becomes part of a new wave. As quickly as this entity came, she vanished, and the mortal desire to drink water became an overpowering sensation. I got up and decided I needed a drink of water. As soon as I stepped in my kitchen, it was as if I had just walked out into the Milky Way galaxy itself. The lights of my kitchen appliances were projecting into my field of view as a massive spiralling galaxy. I saw the individual stars twinkle as this celestial mass rotated within my kitchen, and I could all but gaze at its magnificence. Found a cup on the counter and proceeded to fill it with water and drink the whole thing, only to forget I had just drank the cup of water and remind myself I needed it. I must have consumed at least 7 to 8 full glasses of water before I realised I'd been drinking this whole time. This began the last leg of the journey of my insane trip. I rejoined G in the living room, who was sitting silently watching the documentary series that must have been playing for hours past this point. I sat down and joined him in the revelry, and a particular episode called After Dark had begun, where it showed the activities of nature that occurred by night. I watched in awe as I became a leopard stalking its prey in the shadow of night. I felt the terror of being a seal pup crying out for its parents in complete darkness, hoping to hear the fated response. I became a colony of meerkats, preparing a new tunnel system for its newborns. I even became an owl using its precise night vision to swoop in on unsuspecting vole. For the next hour or so, I lived the life of the animals we witnessed on the screen, until my dog came into the room demanding to be let out. This brought me back to some semblance of reality, which had meant absolutely nothing to me this entire time. The come down came quickly, and soon I felt myself residing within my own body again. The last residual effects were quite pronounced, however. G pointed at a spider residing within its web on my back porch as we stepped back out onto the patio, which by now almost 10 hours had passed. I looked at the spider, and I could feel the energy it emitted radiating into the world as an aura of existence. At this sight, I realised I could sense the energy of all living things around me. The grass, trees, and all of the tiny insects around me all flowed with an interconnected force that was so powerful I was brought to tears yet again. After an hour or two of a few more residual effects and breathing patterns, I returned to a sense of somewhat normalcy. It took roughly 2 days after, however, to feel myself fully again. This was especially pronounced within 24 hours after the trip, as I felt as though I couldn't even begin to communicate or interpret what I had experienced. Conclusion: absolute insanity. It was far more devastatingly powerful than I anticipated. After this experience, I gained a profound appreciation for all forms of life, and have completely altered my perception of death itself. I haven't tripped since this moment, but I still feel the itch every now and then. All I can say is, be very careful where you think your limits are set, and always be aware that hallucinogens such as LSD and shrooms can be far too powerful to handle. I'm glad I experienced this trip, but at the same time I remain horrified at the prospect of ever returning to such a state again. Be safe, folks. BW. 3,750 to 4,500 UG LSD nightmare trip report. First things first. As you can see by the title, this trip ended up being one of the most powerful I've ever been through, and I was in no condition to be taking acid at all, let alone such a massive amount. I was an idiot. Learned from my mistakes. It was a little less than a year ago. A good friend and I had been tripping 1 to 2 times a month for about 6 months, and had been slowly increasing the doses we'd been taking. So by this time I had taken 1000 UG a few times, and was extremely comfortable at this dose. I wanted a little more excitement for this particular night, so I got in touch with my source and arranged to pick up a higher dose. I met him around 5:30 in the afternoon after work, right at the beginning of a long weekend. He told me that he had a new batch of LSD that had just come in, and that it was super strong, so I went with that instead of the other acid I had been buying. What I didn't realise at the time was that this sheet of acid was between 250 to 300 UG per tab, so by failing to ask into this new batch further, I sealed my own fate. I took 15 tabs of this blotter all at once, around 6 o'clock with my buddy, who took 4 tabs to be safe, and we decided to watch YouTube videos until we came up. What follows is a little foggy. All in all, I only remember a small portion of this trip. 6:30 PM. This is when the effects started to become very clear. My heart started pumping more, and I could feel the stuff climbing up my spine. At this stage I also started getting afraid I would have a bad trip. I don't know why. The vibrations were pretty bad at this point already as well. 7 PM. The first peak hits me. I was not ready for it to take hold so quickly. In the past it had sometimes taken 90 minutes until I even started to notice the drug. I made it through this one okay by allowing YouTube to distract me. 9 PM. The next wave hits me and just blows me the fuck away. I remember looking at the TV and seeing a flower bloom out from the screen towards my face. As it neared me I noticed that there was a woman standing in front of it. Flabbergasted and completely unable to communicate, I stared at her face wide-eyed for a few seconds. She looked deep into my eyes and raised a finger to her lips, telling me to shh, before exploding into a kaleidoscope of colours that blanket the room. As I snap out of that, I'm extremely confused and afraid. I yell out, "What the fuck was that?" And my friend started to freak out. I believe because we were seeing the same thing. He doesn't remember this portion of the trip at all. 9:40 PM. Since that last experience, we were both getting more and more worked up, feeding off of each other's wild energy, until it literally became a screaming match. Both of us were now 100% convinced that the world was coming to an end right outside, and that it was our fault for some reason. I make the biggest mistake of the whole night at this time. I break all the rules of tripping in one move. I walk outside by myself in my boxers, while on somewhere between 3,750 and 4,500 micrograms of LSD. At this point I am peaking extremely hard, I can't really see anything. On a dose as high as this, it's kind of like you lose your original 5 senses, and instead have a 6th sense that can perceive everything all at once. It's like every bit of sensory input comes at you on a single plane, if that makes sense. So it's 9:45 PM now. Somehow I've made it across a busy street without getting hit by a car, and I've also managed to lose my boxers. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm now completely naked in public, and I don't know who I am, where I'm from, etc. And on top of all that, I can't see anything past the hallucinations at this point. So across this busy street I see a group of what may or may not be people, and since I'm completely petrified I go over to them to try and ask for some kind of help. As I get closer I start to hear yelling coming from the group, and a large guy comes running up to me. I thought he was going to kill me, so I try to run, but I end up stumbling into this dude's car and he socks me right in the side of the face. I decide that communicating isn't going to work with these people, so I stumble away, back in the direction of my apartment. 9:55 PM. As I'm trying to get away from the dude who hit me, I hear someone yelling for me to fucking stop. This obviously terrifies me, so I run for my life in the opposite direction, only to be stopped by 3 people with guns drawn and pointed at me. I didn't realise that these people were police at the time, but they sure as hell were. They tried to shout some commands at me, but I can't understand anything they're trying to tell me. I try to walk away and get hit with a taser. I watch the prongs float through the air at what seems to be about 1/100th of life's normal speed, and as soon as it hits my skin, I'm completely ripped from my body and I enter a completely infinite and black space. I'm floating through this space and I see a very small point of light, about the size of a distant star off in one direction. I decide to float in the direction of this light, and as I draw nearer I can make out colours coming from the light that I have never seen before. Not just shades of colours that I knew, but entirely new primary colours. I continue moving closer to the light, and I become aware of a very beautiful piece of music playing. It's a song I have never heard before in my life, but it feels so familiar to me it completely relaxes me. As I realise this, I also begin to feel that I have been to this place before. The limitless void of nothingness with this distant light felt more comfortable than my own bed. I bask for what feels like hours in the presence of the most comforting feeling I have ever experienced. Meanwhile, as the light draws near, I realise that it's not a star, but it's actually a book. I approach this massive book, which seems to be the only thing around me, and flip through it. I don't actually reach out and touch it, but somehow using my mind I am able to turn the enormous and ancient feeling pages of this book. It appears to be alive. It looks like a massive tree began to grow out of the nothingness around here, and instead of leaves this book grew from its branches. The pages lay open in front of me. On the left page there is a blue energy emitting from within the book itself. The energy manifests as blue veins twisting and splitting, all pointed towards the spine of the book. On the opposite page there is a similar energy but in red instead of blue. The words duality, truth, and you shouldn't be seeing this right now floated through my mind. As I heard the last words, I snapped out of it. It felt like I had literally existed as part of that black space for years, but as I came to, I was still in the middle of falling from being tased. So I hit the ground. I still have no fucking idea who I am or anything, but the police end up having to tase me 2 more times just to get me to stay on the ground. They then load me into an ambulance and I black out from there until I get to jail. This experience was by far the single most intense of my entire life. I just felt like sharing it here. I've come to accept it, and I actually took a lot of good things away from that trip, so I don't regret it, but would not advise you to take that much LSD in a bad mood, or you will not be the same for a while, or even taking it in general. I hope that someone can learn from this experience and maybe keep from making the same mistakes. TLDR, I took between 3,750 UG and 4,500 UG of acid and lost my shit. Don't be an idiot like I was. A 1000 microgram LSD trip report, posted to Reddit by a lethargic passenger 4 years ago. Let me start this by saying, holy crap. People say LSD is different after you get up to that 1000 microgram range, but this felt like a totally different beast. I was doing it in my room at the night, during the end of my birthday. I actually got a laptop for my birthday, and a lot more money than usual from relations, but this trip was still my best present. I took 4 acid lollies with around 260 to 280 micrograms. I also made a weed salad, using 4 different strains of weed rolled in keef that I would smoke after the come-up. The come-up itself was fast. I consumed the lollies over about 20 minutes, and I was already feeling it by the 4th one. I just laid in bed and moved around a bit while listening to music. This is when shit got real. My visuals escalated really quickly, and they were in full swing within an hour and 45 minutes. Time became irrelevant very quickly. Music was the only thing tethering me with time and space, as I needed to flip my record that I was listening to, and it let me take a breather every 20 minutes or so. The visuals were unlike anything I've ever seen. I prepared myself a lot of objects to look at, but for the most part I just stared at the ceiling, a blank canvas for my mind to lose itself in. One particular visual occurrence I could recall was my room turning into a complete other place that had 3 doors and a pillar in the middle with a complex geometric star-like object on top. It then proceeded to beam directly into my head. I was transfixed and teleported back to these impossible places, impossible objects. I was peaking really hard at this point. I went to flip another record, and I sat down and noticed my entire being was coated in the insanely complex geometric film-like wrap around my body and particular objects. I just looked at my arm. It felt like this film was pushing me, and I wasn't in control of my body. As it motioned in a direction my body would follow, I was in a complete ego-death-like state. I was aware of my existence in areas, but I didn't even know what I had taken at this point. There was also this wave-like pattern that was just above me, that looked a little like a topographic map for mountains in very complex geometric shapes. I lifted my hand, and as it went through it, it acted like water, where the water rippled as my hand went through it, but still had structure. I also began to feel the film-like substance as I hovered my hand around it and tried to touch my fingertips. Another cool thing that happened in the middle of the trip was that I was looking at my vinyl of Sgt. Pepper's, and as I stared at it, my eyes began to connect all the characters' eyes on the cover, and began to form this dot-to-dot puzzle-like object that looked too purposeful to be an accident. It's like these characters were put in exact positions on purpose, like a hidden message. The last face the dot-to-dot focused my eye line on was Aleister Crowley in the left-hand corner. For some reason, I was told to put the plastic sleeve circle on the cover and use it like some weird Sherlock Holmes hidden message magnifying glass. The Beatles on the cover were moving, and I think they were talking to me. Throughout this trip, I definitely felt the presence of something. I can't really tell you what it was, but I had a lot of auditory hallucinations. One in particular was this strange culmination of noises that sounded like they were game noises, chewing sounds, old-fashioned buttons being pressed, and weird whining noises. They were all mashed into one continuous loop that kept repeating over and over and over again throughout the trip. I thought it was the presence of some entity, but it kept fading out, and it was like it was moving. I think it might be related to this film-like thing I mentioned. When I closed my eyes, I felt like my body was moving at the speed of light. It felt as though I was spinning in one of those spaceman test run things where they go around in circles to get insane amounts of horizontal g-force. I was also able to leave my body. It felt like my mind could move independently of it, and I could physically move it around my body. It felt as if it was a buzzing dot-like object moving around my body in my room. A lot more happened, but I think this is long enough. The trip lasted about 16 to 18 hours, aided a bit by copious amounts of weed near the end, and this was far beyond what I expected a 10-strip-like dose to be. It definitely blew my mind, and I'm very much questioning the existence of other beings and even a god. The stuff LSD does to you is so far beyond amazing, particularly the complexity of this visual geometry, and the insane things you think and feel. It puts everything we think and believe into question. Last little weird thing. Near the end of my trip, a mate was supposed to come over at like 3. I was chilling in my room waiting for him to arrive, and I thought I heard him chatting with my brother downstairs. But when I went downstairs 15 minutes later, my brother said he wasn't there, and he was coming soon. It sounded so real, and even weirder when he got there. I'd heard these conversations throughout the night that echoed exactly what was being said in the hallucinations. Coupled with the film-like wrap around my body, it led me to believe that the time portal thing in Donnie Darko isn't far from the truth maybe. To end the trip, We watched the new Game of Thrones, and then we decided to watch Spirited Away, as I hadn't seen it since I was like 13. God damn, that film is so good. I also felt very connected with the story. A lot that happened in the movie echoed a lot of what happened in my trip, which was weird. Anyway, this went on longer than I thought it would. Thanks for reading if you got this far. TLDR. Ate a shitload of acid on my birthday, went far beyond what I ever expected, and I think I met an alien or similar sort of entity. Hi, this is my first trip report. This happened around June of 2017, and had about 4 or 5 120 UG experiences prior to that. I was 21 at the time. The very first time I tried LSD about 30 micrograms, and this was also my first psychedelic experience. I was smoking weed pretty much daily at that point. I had very minor visuals, and I felt euphoric, like the best high ever. It basically was a 6-hour-long amazing conversation with one of my best friends. He took the same dose. It was his first time too. After that, I felt like I understood what this substance kinda is hinting towards, so I knew I was ready for more. I had a strong feeling of, oh, I know this. I now know that I have this talent of remembering my trips quite well. Most of them anyways. So as I mentioned, the next 4 to 5 trips were all of around 100 to 120 micrograms. They all had significant insights, but none of the magnitude of this 600 one. At this point I was watching Leo's videos for about 2 years. I started meditating and lifting weights. I was very much spiral dynamics stage green, and I still was identifying myself as an atheist and an environmentalist and stuff like that. So listening to Terence McKenna and others, I knew that I wanted to do a higher dose, but in solitude. All my previous trips were done with a couple of friends. So I got 4 bloaters of 150 micrograms each. I told my mom that I would do a whole day meditation and that I would close my phone. I was home for a few days. I woke up at about 7 or 8 AM. I prepared food for the day so that I wouldn't have to do anything whilst tripping. So at about 8:55 I put the little papers under my tongue, sat in a meditation position and waited calmly. I had my journal next to me. I wanted to record everything. I'm gonna combine storytelling with what I wrote because I couldn't write much, as you might imagine. About 25 minutes later, I wasn't sure if placebo or not, but I started to feel the come up, and I had to shit twice. My body knew it had to be empty, or else. The come up was much stronger and faster than my previous trips, so I started panicking a bit at the thought that I might not be able to handle it. But I knew that if I panicked, music would just melt that panic away. So I just laid back with my eyes closed and put on the Division Bell album from Pink Floyd. Holy motherfucking shit. I don't listen to whole albums a lot in everyday life, but when tripping, I feel like albums were made specially to be listened to whilst tripping. So anyway, very quickly I started visually perceiving, seeing impossible stuff like emotions and language that were like different kinds of oils and liquids flowing next to each other, forming layers that were forming reality. And as I was melting in between those liquidy layers, I saw every single person I ever knew. They were there, here, with me, in me. They were me. It was the first time I actually saw and understood what previously was just hearsay. The fact that I am, is God, godliness, everythingness. It was quite a shock to the system back then, and the first reaction was frustration, because if I am God, everything, then how can I not be bored? But as I was taking notes, I kept realising more and more that the kind of information I am accessing is useless to try to capture in words. I also saw much more clearly how the one that is frustrated of that is the ego, which is a thought identified with itself. Beingness is useless to the ego. Oneness is useless, even counterproductive, to that which is designed to fragment. My mind was really trying hard to understand. Okay, but what does this mean to me, Bogdan? And it was disappointed that it only means that everything is one. No superpowers. This trip won't be a magic solution to anything. Quote, only the ego can be sufficiently satisfied with the sufficient amount of ego death. Only an ego wants a reality more like this, a calmness trip ego, more like that, end quote. I was being made aware of random things from my unconscious, including my wish for ego death. I started writing seriously, with all caps, ego death, in my journal. But just as soon as I wrote that, I saw that only the ego can want ego death, and that being just is. The ego was being shown its obvious bullshit, and it didn't like that. I saw clearly how childish my personality was. Discipline is key. I still struggled to comprehend oneness, and kept trying to understand what does this oneness mean when I'm not on acid. And the only answer that I could come up with was that the work, or sadhana, is to grow my balls in order to cultivate more and more presence. I was afraid of the peaceful, transcendental power of discipline. Quote, true balance is to be utterly, seriously disciplined without being so serious, end quote. So basically being disciplined but relaxed. I saw how I needed to incorporate and integrate everything I knew. So by this point I started peaking. More like I arrived to the base of the mountain and started going up. This is where the trip really begins. While with my eyes closed, I started going deeper and deeper, to the point where what I was experiencing was so radical and extraordinary that when I tried to come back to write in my journal, it was like being sucked through a straw. I had to completely let go of this reality to be shown what I needed to see. The last thing I was able to write was, quote, oh, how have I to let go of this side to even, end quote. Here, similarly to how people describe meeting entities / machine elves, I met these two beings, except we were one. They were my masculine and feminine, but actually, they were the masculine and feminine. I was experiencing myself as a sort of child archetype, pure curiosity and innocence. She was represented as a woman, but made out of white light, pure beauty, wisdom and kindness. And he was just the most badass kind of fit, kind of old dude that sort of looked like Peter Ralston. And it was like my fully mature, fully fledged potential future self. Raw, infinite power. He also had this most amazing tracksuit that was this kind of dark red, but not really. It was the most amazing colour ever. So anyway, they congratulated me for being brave, for coming to them. She was proud of me, but he was sort of giving me a tough love kind of thing, but perfectly balanced, with infinite wisdom and love. Perfect parenting. Then she took me by the hand and said, let me show you something. She wanted to teach me what suffering is. And we flew through the universe, and she took me to a weird place where there was a kind of bookshelf. I was experiencing time as a physical dimension, and every single book in that library bookshelf was one of my memories. All of my memories were laid before me, and she proceeded to show me every single suffering I ever had. From every awkward moment with a girl, every single time I got angry because I stubbed my toe, to things like the death of my father, I was 12. She would take each of these sufferings, like a string made out of light, and after she showed them to me, she would weave the strings together, making a rope. And basically she kept explaining and showing me that because of this suffering you then did this, and you learned this, and she would build up and up and up, and then because of that you became the type of person that knows the types of things that made you take acid in this manner, in order to feel this. And she pulled on the finished rope, squeezing pure emotion out of it, and I felt it all at once. I started crying like I never cried in my life. I never saw anything more beautiful. I didn't think that there could be anything that beautiful. It was completely overwhelming. There cannot be words deep enough to explain how beautiful what I just saw or experienced was. I don't know for how much I was crying. I described this very briefly, but this took hours in real life. I basically watched all of my memories being played like on a DVD. I don't recall how I experienced time there. Now we're halfway towards the peak. After all that happened, it was his turn to show me something. We walked through the universe, and he explained and showed me in incredible detail what consciousness is and how awesome it is. He would literally take a piece of reality, of space, like you take frosting from cake with your finger, and he showed me how it can turn into literally anything. He continued to show me uncountable, unimaginable things that infinity does/is, while we would get bigger and bigger, zooming out of a Mandelbrot set type fractal, where I saw whole concepts like music manifested in front of me. I literally saw music as a whole, like a fractal jewellery, and I remember looking at it and saying, "Oh, and that's music." But it wasn't just a visual thing, it was like seeing, feeling, hearing, composing, playing and being every possible infinite piece of music at the same time. Such it was for many other concepts that I don't remember. At some point we transcended fractality, where I was shown the present moment, how I was it, and how it is infinite. Now, this all seems common knowledge for me, but then it was very significantly shocking, because it was the first time I actually understood that the universe was infinite. I pretty much had a materialist paradigm until then, although I was quite open to spirituality even as a child. Time was dilating more and more, and he proceeded to show me in increasingly ingenious and complex ways what life is. I was being shown how the universe is a perpetuum mobile, and at one point I recall becoming the seasons, cycling and cycling. Every second became years and years, which escalated to experiencing lifetimes, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, over and over and over. It was interesting because I recall seeing this death rebirth through the eyes of animals. I saw lifetimes of birds specifically, and other animals that I can't remember as specifically. Remember I said how what she showed me was the most overwhelmingly and possibly beautiful thing that I ever saw and that I cried like never before? Well, what he showed me was orders of magnitude more beautiful than that. My physical body was crying so freaking hard, but I wasn't paying attention to it. What he showed me was too overwhelming. I don't even remember what exactly I started crying from. I only remember the significance of it. My brain kinda had to forget that moment. So the insights were getting deeper and deeper, and I approached a sort of black hole. I don't know any other way of how to describe it. As an analogy, he was teaching me how to fight, like a kung fu master, and he had me pinned down or holding me underwater. My experience wasn't of fighting or anything, it was about life and love and death, but it was pushing my limits of what I can handle, but exactly, precisely to where I needed. My physical body was on its belly, on the bed, contorting, and my face was in a pool of saliva, so I was kinda drowning and suffocating in my own saliva. I could stop whenever I wanted, but the hypoxia worked synergistically with the trip to create an incredible ecstasy. Basically, he pushed me as close to death as possible, to the point where I almost fell over. It is my speculation that if I had taken much more than that, I could have, or better said would have, made the conscious choice to suffocate the physical body and pass over into that abyss. At that point I heard her say to him, "Enough, you're killing him," and I was sucked back into human consciousness and I opened my eyes. 8 hours had passed. If I remember correctly, I started writing right away, saying things like, "Take all the notes you want, you will never understand. This information can be understood only through being, with a capital B. You can't be more of this or that because you already are infinite. Don't take yourself so seriously, just keep your role in society but don't be identified with it. Remember to snap out of the illusion from time to time and you'll be fine. Just get up and live your life. Be creative." My mind was shook. It felt like it had the answer, but it couldn't find it. Maybe a bit like a raccoon that dips its sweet, amazing cotton candy in water and then it disappears. Basically, the human conclusion I got was to keep working to become as conscious as possible. I was in a state of blissful ecstasy, but I became ultra aware how constantly changing everything is. This was very painful and scary for me at the time, very much anchored in ego. Because if everything, including my state of being, is constantly changing, then I couldn't find myself anymore. I I kept becoming aware of the very different emotions and states of being that consciousness is capable of creating through personality, and it was scary. Again, I didn't have the base of knowledge of how to interpret all these things correctly. It was like my ego was trying super hard to reconfigure itself, and it kept being deconstructed and reconstructed. One way thoughts managed to reconfigure false identity was the objection that what I saw was too beautiful, and I kept reminding myself, holy shit, the beauty. Jesus fucking Christ, the beauty. And I'd start crying and weeping again and again for hours on end after that. I had to leave the house to distract myself with something. I was sobering up. This was about 6 PM, so about 10 hours had passed, although I still was really high. And I went on a walk through a forest nearby, and I just kept weeping repeatedly, utterly in awe of the beauty and the profundity of what I just witnessed. The next days were pretty blissful, but obviously what came next was a period of intense integration that only very recently I feel like it came to fruition. So anyway, I know this report is already kinda long, so now I'll give you my 2 cents on it. Obviously it wasn't very smart what I did, and although I'm very grateful for the experience and it was truly awesome, I will always recommend upping your dosage systematically and gradually. Unconsciously I was hoping that this one trip will solve all of my problems. We all watch Leo's and others' videos, so I don't have to tell you this, but no one thing is going to fix your problems, because your problems aren't actually what you think. It's all consciousness, so every single little detail of reality is absolutely mind-blowingly intelligent and perfect. Actually, the problem, or what makes us perceive problems in things, is our beliefs about what problems are, which comes from conditioning and separation. Lol, the separatists from Star Wars and all that. Okay, I'm just gonna leave it at that. I have a few more trip reports coming. Love you guys. A Religious Awakening report, originally written in 2020. Uploaded to the Actualize.org forums by RM Qualthrough, June 11, 2022. I had no idea prior to this what non-duality was, and had no religious inclinations whatsoever. This is exactly as I recorded it, and attempted to interpret it without the aid of any knowledge gleaned from researching non-dual tradition. I found such tradition via searching monism after the fact. This was an experience of vaped NNDMT on the peak of 500 micrograms of acid. Blast off. It was on my second inhale of DMT using my mighty vape that it hit the fan. I closed my eyes and experienced a complete out-of-body trip to heaven with visuals, in full colour, intricate and detailed. To walk through from the beginning, first of all imagine you a Matryoshka doll, those Russian doll things, and the innermost one. Well, what happened was, my human vessel, which was this innermost doll, was left down below, and I was launched or sucked away from myself and upwards. As I kept going up, it was like the outer shells of the dolls were shattering as I broke into higher and higher realms of reality, like going from the smallest doll in the set to the biggest all-encompassing doll. Rather than a tunnel of light going towards heaven, it was more like I was being sucked up from my human self into heaven. I was watching my lower level consciousness selves as I was propelled higher and higher up. The visuals were very vivid and intense, but difficult to explain. It was like I had a collar around my vessel, whatever was being launched up into these planes of reality, and the patterning was on this collar, like perhaps yellow vibrant squares for example, but these weren't just random shapes on the back of my eyelids, these were like fully lucid visions of an alternate dimension. And I was being sucked upwards through the middle into higher realms of reality, and I'd go up through these layers of visions higher and higher until I reached the ultimate reality. I reached heaven. It was not heaven in the sense that it felt blissful or anything. That's the thing. It didn't feel like anything. It just was. But it was heaven in the sense of being the ultimate reality. When every layer is peeled off, that's what's left. I was in heaven. I have visited heaven. I saw space-time itself form shape, Outside the boundaries of what I was seeing was void, this colourless non-existence. I had wondered what possible layer deeper I could have possibly gone, except by dying, but then I realised that dying would not do it, because non-existence does not exist, and it's not possible for anything that exists to not exist. I, or you, may die, quote unquote, but we will never get to not exist. We will always exist. I can see where people get ideas about reincarnation. A tree can sprout many leaves. We are the tree. We, as in you or I, might think we're the leaf, but that's just an illusion, a subsection of the whole which is the tree that we actually are. We are all existence. Anything that has existed cannot ever not exist, because non-existence does not exist. We are existence. We are eternal. We are all there ever was and all there ever will be. Always were and always will be. The Alpha and Omega. We are unstoppable because we are existence itself. We are everything. I also did speak to a divine being or something of that nature, but my recollection of that is incredibly scant. I think between my visions through heaven I have opened my eyes and spoke to the deity and asked what it wants me to do, I think, and if it wants me to bring back the experience and tell other people, something along those lines. I don't remember the specifics, but definitely something along those lines happened. I saw a large female deity's face across my ceiling briefly, I recall. But the divine being did not feel more powerful than me, us, you, or we. That was part of the thing as well. That everything was one and the same. Everything in existence was one. Nothing exists but existence itself. Whatever this presence was simply a manifestation of a part of us that was helping facilitate my journey. I, in fact, felt like I had gone even further beyond the realm where this presence existed. Using the tree sprouting leaves analogy, perhaps these presences are like the branches. One step above us leaves, but a step below the ultimate reality of the tree. I feel like I reached and reunited with the tree itself. I consider this to be a legitimate religious experience, along the lines of Buddhist, monistic belief. I've never had any religious belief prior to psychedelic use. This was not getting high. This was literally a religious, mystical experience. A deeply earth-shattering, spiritual, religious experience. Everything I write since, and everything I have searched for and researched, is due to this trip, which I now cannot recall experientially, aside from perhaps a minuscule memory of visuals, which is also just a vague facsimile. I've never been able to reach that state of being ever again, albeit other trips after were still enlightening, were not just random alien rave scenes or panic attacks. I never came back from that trip. I've been trying to make sense of it all since. So I was just thinking, what better way to get into Christmas spirit than to read out a trip report that occurred around Christmas time. This will probably be the last video before Christmas, so I hope you all have a good one, and don't forget to overdose on Brussels sprouts or whatever you fucking savages decide to do, and we'll be back in action next week. A Christmas Carol on 1 mg of LSD, posted to the LSD subreddit 8 years ago. I'd got my hands on about 12 drops of pure acid. I tried 2 drops once. It was one of the cleanest, most visual LSD trips I'd ever had, about 200 micrograms worth. 2 months later, on December 21st, 2013, I decided I felt like chilling and tripping to a new artist I had discovered, Bibio. So I took 2 drops again. Later I'd find out that there was nothing left in the bottle anymore. Oops. That nose drop pipette I used was not such a good idea. 7 minutes in, I started to feel an intense rush of energy, as if something great was about to happen. Fun stuff incoming, as my friend foretold me on Skype. The music sounded great, beautifully detailed and bouncing off my walls, nothing out of the ordinary. 30 minutes in though, I started losing my ego. Full-on ego death about 30 minutes after dropping is not something I'd experienced before. I'd been there only twice before on shrooms, so I decided to knock on my sister's door for some help. We'd arranged that I could knock on her door any time if I was having a difficult trip. This was the only occasion I made use of that arrangement during the experience. I sat down on my sister's bed and we started talking a bit. Everything was extremely clear and colourful, radiating with immense energy. Not much else was happening yet in terms of visuals. She found my music on Spotify and played it. It sounded terrible on the little laptop speakers, and the advertisements in between songs baffled me. So we decided to go back to my room, and I laid down on my bed. Around 45 minutes in, while laying on my bed, it really started to hit me. Everything started melting, including myself. Time slowed down to an unfathomable crawl. If you've ever heard music before on 400 micrograms of LSD, imagine that slowed down fivefold. While the walls of my room were melting, I started feeling the most intense body high and euphoria. I could hardly believe such a feeling was even possible. Then 10 seconds later, this feeling started doubling, and again 20 seconds later. This repeated for a couple of minutes while I was laughing uncontrollably, crying even, overloaded with feelings. 50 minutes in now, and I was gone. Full on catatonic. I've taught myself to start chanting when a trip takes a difficult turn. In my catatonic state, I kept chanting for about an hour. The trip then continued into a dreamlike state. I saw a sphere spinning in space. This sphere represented my timeless consciousness. Over and over again, I was presented with memories of a childhood I have never experienced. They were alternate universes of my consciousness. In one of these universes, I had made the correct decisions and influenced the world positively, and in another one, negatively. I remember the song Lucky and Unhappy by Air playing in the background. This must have influenced those perspectives. Convinced I had left this life for good, I made peace with it. The index of my consciousness, the view of the sphere in space, was replaced by my room. It was a fake version of my room. However, including a fake version of my sister as well. Some aspects of the room had changed, such as my computer monitor, which was completely white. I was still in an alternate reality. I felt a bond with my sister stronger than I had ever thought possible. She was to be the controller of the rest of my trip, a personification of God, if you will. I believed I was stuck in an infinite loop of having to choose a path in life. This kept repeating until I were to choose the good path in life. I relived previous memories, trips and dreams. Each of these sub-trips was part of one big test. I had to unlock the meaning of life, sort of. Each time I thought I had the answer, I said, I get it now. And consequently I was laughed at by whomever and thrown into another sub-trip. I tried everything in order to become part of the answer, including physically dropping myself on my bed in the real world. Thank you, TripSir, for not letting me hurt myself. It wasn't until 4 months later, when I took LSD again at a dose of 250 micrograms, that I managed to understand the message of this trip. The key was, it is impossible to understand the meaning of life, you have to just become it. Life has always existed, and it will continue to exist forever. There is no answer, because the question is a fallacy. After 4 hours of being in this catatonic state, only pausing periodically to take sips of water, I returned to the real world. I couldn't believe it. "You're still here," I said to my sister, and then greeted my cats as if I had not seen them in a lifetime. 5 hours in, and the trip was over already. I had learnt what I needed to learn, and that life is good.